Mr. May, podcast team member. Where do you think the treasures are?
Do you think it's in San Diego? No?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're now a member of the podcast team.
Do you think it says Dig Jacks? No?
Yeah,
No?
okay. I got some
No,
t-shirts.
That was
He's
amazing.
allowed to say that.
Now, what I was thinking about when I typed that was specifically to a couple of lines in Charleston where the word "or" is used, where it says "freedom at the birth of the century" or May 1913, which seem to refer to the exact same thing, right? If you were reading that monument, May 1913 is on the monument, but it's kind of small. But if you were reading the monument, I think the first thing you would notice is the freedom at the birth of the century. Maybe not word for word, but that's what that monument is about. Like it's what it came from. It came from the War of Independence for Cuba or whatever, and the birth of a century. I forget which one. And then you would notice the May 1913. And I wanted to sort of parallel that with weights and roots extended together saved the site of granite walls, right? So the way those two lines work, it seems to reference the same thing. It seems to reference the weight and roots extended saved the site of the granite walls. So how would one, like we know, so what were we saying? About
where do we want to start?
Yeah.
Well, I get like what we were talking about, whether lines in other verses could either hint at or confirm other lines in other verses. That was not a very
mouthful, hey?
way to say it, but
but yes, essentially that is what we were saying.
I don't like that idea. And I think it's like I don't know. I'm of the belief that each puzzle, despite maybe having like a fundamental kind of backbone between all of them, like to say that, for instance, let's say one line from verse 5, to say that confirms something in verse 6 or something like that, it almost seems kind of shadow theory, right? Where you're just kind of pushing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm Chris, were you saying that one line in a verse confirms another line in another verse?
No, not at the confirm level. I thought we were saying was like could put your like one verse could put your mind into the place that could help you understand a different verse. I just read what you wrote on the YouTube, and I thought that's what you were going with.
No. So just literally where I was going with it was the other day we were talking about the structure of the verses, and for so long we have assumed one line goes with the line above or the line below, right?
Right.
And last stream we were talking about how we need to get out of that. We need to get out of that way of thinking because it's going to screw it. It's 100% going to screw us up in something eventually. But is there a way, like, are there certain lines in here where we know it's referencing either the line or above or the line below? Like,
okay, get you.
Like the May 1913 or the freedom at the birth of a century. Or,
now I'm on the same page.
So it says
all
or,
right.
So we know those are the same thing, right? Like, it's two ways of describing the
because
same thing.
that's a clause, like it makes like a clause.
Yeah. But
you could say the same for New York too. Like with the line that says about there's the two lines basically about the Indies native, right? And so, in that sense, those two lines almost have to go together because they reference the same thing, right?
Well, but they kind of don't, right? So let me go to the New York fucking verse.
I'm there now.
This is a favorite topic of mine.
Yeah,
I have a lot of thoughts on this.
So like Chris was saying last stream, although it says cars abound, although the sign nearby speaks of Indies natives, the natives still speak of him of hard words in 3 volumes. And we've always assumed it means cars abound, although the sign nearby speaks of Indies natives, but that's just in how we're reading it. Like we could just as easily read it as cars abound, although the sign nearby speaks of Indies natives, but the natives, and it doesn't even say but. We always put a but the natives still speak. It doesn't. It just says the natives still speak of. or the natives still speak, and then the next line is up. Like I'm doing it now because I'm so damn used to putting these things together when they shouldn't necessarily be put together.
See, and I've always thought, like, if we were to break that particular verse into paragraphs, I think the first paragraph would end with "in summer" or "cars abound." You could pick one. But I think like that second section where you like, I think the way that section is supposed to be read, because it just makes more sense this way, is although the sign nearby speaks of Indy's native, I would put a period or a comma there. The natives still speak of him of hard word, right? So the sign is talking about the natives, but the natives are talking about him of hard word.
But there's no comma there, and there's a period at the end of vols. So,
but there's no
to say that like
in any of them.
No, I just told you there's a period at the end of vols and there's a period at the end of B.
Well, because those are abbreviations, you have to put a period at the end of them.
Is it an abbreviation?
Well, yeah.
How do you know that?
The B I'll give you, but if you look at it, there's also a period at the end of every verse. So there's some punctuation here. He uses commas in verse 7 and verse 9, like to put your own punctuation in there is to show your personal interpretation, which is
but that's
totally
not what I'm doing.
Fine.
I wasn't putting in my own punctuation. I'm reading it the way it's written out here, right? So hold on, let's back up a second. If vols, hold on. If vols is an abbreviation, I would, and most other people assume that it stands for volumes. I know a lot of people have tried to make it be like volleys for volleyball or whatever else it is, but volumes makes a lot of sense, right? And so in that sense, because that's an abbreviation, you need to put a period at the end of it. If an abbreviation shows up in the middle of a sentence, you put a period at the end of it, of the abbreviation.
Hang on while we're on this. So looking at verse 12, where M and B are set in stone. M and B is obviously like, I don't know, is that their initials?
Man and Beast? Wasn't it Man and Beast?
Man and Beast, Mozart and Beethoven, neither of which have periods. R doesn't have a period. L doesn't have a period. Is there anything else that we know of that we know to be just a shortened part of a word in any of these where we can like test this theory?
Take Roanoke's verse. Ride the man of Oz. If Oz was an abbreviation for ounce, there would have to be a period at the end of it.
I mean, maybe.
That's the thing. Have to be, and what he chose to do.
Well, but these are writing mechanics. It's not something that's exclusive to Byron or The Secret. Right? Like these are common writing mechanics.
But it's also a puzzle, and if you put a period in there, it's pretty obvious what that's referring to. I'm trying to think.
And at the end of the day, he could have done whatever the hell he wanted.
Yeah.
This is
he
true.
could have done. He could have left it out intentionally. He could have left it out because he didn't think about it. He could have left it out because he's a bad editor. Like it's tough to take it to that level and try to like say I can.
That's getting into the Byron Wooden realm, and I'm trying to avoid that, right? But knowing what I know about literature and how to write it, that's just how I kind of translate those things, right? Because one of the most interesting things about all these verses is the lack of punctuation. Because if there was punctuation in there, especially in the way that like typical writing mechanics occurs, they would read exponentially differently, I think. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that would make them easier or harder necessarily. Maybe getting the order correct, if indeed the order needs to be corrected, punctuation would help with that. But that's why we can't just put our own in, right? Admittedly, we can't do that because then it just, like you said, you're making it your own verse then, right?
I mean, some of these do have pretty like obvious punctuation to help break things up. So I'm assuming, I don't know, like if he wanted shit broke up, never mind. Go where you were going.
So there's a structure to some of these that is brought on by how he used rhyming. And that's something that we can sort of like objectively look at. So if you look at verse 7 or you look at verse 12, you can structure things based on the rhyming pattern. where M and B are set in stone, and to Congress R is known, right? So stone, known. Those two rhyme, those two go together.
But there is a,
holder.
but in fairness, there's a comma in between Congress and R.
That's true, but that doesn't, what would the comma tell us? That
It's
they
just a
don't
pause.
go together?
No, yeah.
Or that they're two separate things. Because if you could read this as one line of verse referencing one specific thing, Congress R, you know? But the punctuation may be there to split it up and tell us, no, these are two different things. And to Congress, pause, split, R is known.
Yeah.
But if we go through the rest of it, so there's this thing called the ballad stanza. And the ballad stanza is like A, B, C, B, and the B's rhyme.
Yeah.
So there's like line A, line B. The last word of line B rhymes with the last word of the next B. It's hard to visually describe that.
Like
if you look at the rest of this verse, all of the sections of, so you call them stanzas, rhyme. So L sits in left, beyond his shoulder is the fair folks treasure holder, right? So those, if we follow this like rhyming pattern as a way to identify the lines that go together, then, you know, say now we've got two sections.
Whoa,
and then another one. The end of 10 by 13 is your clue. Fence and fixture central 2.
What happens if you only read the lines that rhyme?
You miss half the verse.
Well, sure, but listen to the way that it works, right? Where M and B are set in stone, and to Congress R is known. Beyond his shoulder, treasure holder. The end of 10 by 13 is your clue. Fence and fixture central 2. So is your clue central 2, and then the rest don't really do any rhyming.
Well, it's the last 5 are sort of broken up.
Yeah.
That brush and hush rhyme, but they don't sit in the right structure.
Right.
Verse 7 is another one that's like highly structured based on a rhyming pattern. Like sweet, 3, and C. Like sweet is a what do they call it? It's not a rhyme. It's there's a different word for it where the E counts for it.
Yeah.
But then sky high, direction attention, step kept, right? There you can break up verse 7 very clearly into 6, 2, 4, 4. If we're going to talk about what lines go together.
Yeah.
Then you get into verse 10, and he is like, you know what? No rhymes. So we've got, well, there's one, sound abound, but the rest of it is what they would call free verse from like a poetry perspective. We're talking about like literary stuff.
Yeah.
So you've got these like hyper structured verse 7 and verse 12 on one end of the spectrum, and this completely unstructured free verse, more or less, verse 10. We also hypothesize verse 10 as part of the hardest puzzle. So you may also expect the hardest puzzle to have the least structure to it. It's harder to tell which lines go together if you lose that sort of like stanza structure of rhyming.
But then at that point, that would be a good time to look at, rather than, you know, words or lines that rhyme, try to find connections between them, right? So like I said before,
you'd have to use something else.
Yeah, the natives and the sign, you know, like those are potentially speaking about the same things. It's just showing you a couple different ways to think about them.
They're also way more open to interpretation in that. And same with like your point about verse 5, like verse 5 is another one that has some rhyming in one section, and then the whole end of it, there's no rhyming from flight to the end. Yeah. You know, the whole last half of the verse, there's no rhyme. Tell me where those lines go together. Is it the way that we read it? Is the way that it's written to get us to read it in a way that isn't the way that it's supposed to be read? Like, is that just a show you with one hand and hide it with the other hand kind of misdirection that gets put in there? I have spent probably far too much time questioning these things.
You sort of set my mind down a rabbit hole of something else. So I just kind of want to get your opinion on it real quick, Chris. So you were talking about New York being different in that there is no rhyming. It's broken apart in really weird ways. It's probably the shortest lines of any of the verses in it.
Yeah, one word, nearby.
Yeah, we all
that's a line. Great.
We always assume that this is the hardest verse because it's Byron's hometown and yada 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 and whatever, and he would make it hard. What if this one's just thrown together? What if New York is the last minute? Like we've seen all of these paintings, right? All but a couple of these paintings, and they're all gorgeous and they're all really well done, except for New York, which is splattered with paint everywhere, and it's got like masking tape on it and shit, and it's got a verse that doesn't rhyme and doesn't. What if this one's just thrown together last minute? Like the painting is obviously just thrown together.
Well, for that, we'd need to answer the question definitively of whether he fully wrote the verses first. Some of the stuff that you've talked with JJP about on the videos, it seems like they were doing it in tandem. He was working on the verses and JJP was doing the paintings, and they had this sort of like back and forth going on. And then maybe it was the Joe Allen and Ben podcast recently, or there's something that gave me this nugget of information that seemed to imply that Byron had already written all the verses first and then got everyone else to sort of do their pieces. So
yeah, I don't know which
that I don't
from what I gather, the verse and the painting was done sort of in tandem, right? The casks were buried first. All timelines that we have show that pretty much had to happen. Like the casts were buried first, and the verses and the paintings were sort of done in tandem. I don't know, but I guess it's a good question for John. I don't know for sure. I don't know that he'll remember.
Yeah. But that would make the difference, right? If the verses were made first, then that would rule that out. If they were done in tandem and the last painting was rushed, then it doesn't. It lends to the possibility that the verse was treated similarly.
Yeah. God, could you imagine, like, I don't think anybody thinks about it, but the fallout if the verses were done, like if the casts were made and the verses were done in like 1980 and then the paintings were complete, like the fallout from that would be crazy. Like the way this puzzle works would be totally, or at least the way you could tell everybody that it works would be completely different. I think. Yeah. I don't know.
Agree.
Hi, Matt. Matt came.
Hi, Matt.
Hello.
You want us to start over, or you can
just start from the beginning, take from the top. How much did I miss? Half hour or so?
Oh yeah, we were just signing off actually.
Yeah,
I just wanted to stick in.
We were like, Matt.
Say hey. Yeah. Actually, what you guys are talking about, I had just went through a whole scenario in my head of if the casks were buried and done before he had done the paintings or the verses, which if I was going to do it, that's what I'd do.
Yeah.
You know, but you made it quite clear to me. Yeah, that's not how it happened.
Well, like if we believe any of the story, and I was talking to, there's this guy on Facebook that's been releasing a lot of really interesting PDFs. His name's James Watson. And he released one on like the people who made the people behind the book. He's released a couple of really good PDFs. And I've been talking to him about making a timeline because a question came up today about that interview with Sandy where we always assumed she meant San Francisco, but it's actually Chicago. Yeah. And I had this conversation with him about making a timeline of things that we actually know happened. Like if Chicago was buried in 1980 and any nugget of any of the stories Byron has told are true, they were all buried in 1980, right? And that would, like, it makes the most sense. And if that's true, John didn't start working on these paintings until
didn't he say he did it across 6 months?
Yeah, well, he said he's done it across 6 months. He said he did them all in the same month, and he said he did them over the course of a year, right? he said it a bunch of different times, but all of the time frames that he's given have been within the same year.
Well, the Chicago thing was November, right?
It was June of 1980.
Okay, well then never mind. I was thinking it might have spanned the end of the year.
John just texted me. Hang on. Just saw this. Completely forgot. Or he said he forgot. I'm gonna say next week.
I thought we were doing cicada next week. No.
Fuck it. We'll talk to John about cicada. John just wants to talk about puzzles.
I've tried to get those guys to like engage with me. it's hard to like get someone to like dive into the middle with you.
I just want to talk about like other puzzles because I feel like
we should do the Sunset Trail because they just released a hint, so that's like a fun one. Yeah.
How did they release it? Was it via psychics and mediums? How does that even work?
No, I guess no, because Chris was involved, so he released something that hit the cutting room floor.
I thought you guys had that tied
he
up.
Released. Yeah, oh yeah, much like The Secret, all tied up at the end.
That's nice. Like I wouldn't mind diving down that rabbit hole. I never even finished the audio file. Just because it was like, out of respect, I'm gonna stand back. But yeah, it seemed really well done.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. But yeah,
I feel like 90% of the people who like The Secret have never looked at another puzzle, right? So they don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
I know.
Like, I'm not saying that puzzles have to work the same way, but your mind has to work a specific way for a puzzle, because some ways that people work The Secret just they're not practical. Like they cannot have a definitive answer, and it helps to know how other puzzles work and how people have solved other puzzles in solving this.
Like the that Kane's Jawbone that I always talk about. I wish any of you would get a chance to read it and stuff like that, but it's an interesting one because so the way that puzzle works is you have to take all the pages out and reorder them into the proper order. There's 100 pages of text and you have to put them into the proper order. Many other orders work, but there's only one that's actually definitive, the right one. And so the first step in that story that people often take, as far as I can tell, I've Googled nothing about this book because I'm trying to keep it as I'm trying to stay away from that stuff as best I can.
Yeah.
But the first step everyone's going to want to take is to just read the pages from 1 to 100 and just kind of get a feel for what's in there. But I actually, while I was working on it, I don't know why I did this, but I completely overlooked the cover of the book as if it was important, because the cover of the book is the only part of the book that has any images in it, right? It's the only image in the entire text is the cover. And the amount of information that is potentially on that cover is incredible. And so it really made me start to look at the puzzle a little bit differently. And it's essentially a murder mystery. You have to figure out 6 different killers and 6 different victims, right? Respectively. And the way to do that is the way that I've figured it out to do that is you got to figure out the murder weapons, the way you basically have to solve murders the way that cops would, right? And then solve the puzzle given the information you get about the murders, right? And so it makes you go from inside the book, and then you got to kind of step back from it all and look at it from a much broader perspective. And I think that sort of thing would help with The Secret as well, right? That's why lately I haven't been looking at specific puzzles. I'm looking at the whole thing and trying to figure out what relates between all 12 puzzles. You know what I mean? So that whole thing about Cleveland that I posted that with the implication that information could somehow apply to the other puzzles and, kind of go from there. But I wouldn't have started doing that unless the way I am, unless I had started working on Kane's Jawbone, right? And shout out to Brett Zingler for getting me into that. And actually my dad, of all people, messaged me asking me about it. But, it's just, I'm into it now, and it's helping me with The Secret. I would be remiss if I said it wasn't. So maybe one day we could do it. We could do one about Kane's Jawbone.
Yeah, man, I'm cool doing these about anything that helps people get into the right
Mhm.
frame
It would be fun to look at like old puzzles that have already been solved, like a treasure trove, and
Yeah.
just like talk about the solution, or the wild David Blaine one. That one,
That one's
whenever I read
crazy.
the solution to that, I'm like, how did anyone figure this out?
Well,
I remember that. I totally forgot about it, but yeah, I remember.
wasn't
Yeah,
it,
like-
wasn't it like a big thing where nobody actually figured it out?
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
It was
But
like
s- but same-
Mondo convoluted, wasn't it?
Yeah, like it was like super hard.
Yeah.
But also like even Masquerade, like just to actually like look at some of it in context and see how like Kit Williams sort of thought a puzzle should go together.
Well, do we know what inspired Masquerade, or was that just a completely original idea? Like,
There is a documentary on YouTube about it.
do you know what
He's
it's called?
like hyper reclusive. I'll try to see if I can find it.
Yeah,
Yeah, send me a link if you got it.
I once sent him a message asking him to come on the podcast. He like
Kit?
Kit Williams. He responded, and it was basically no.
Did he use the F word, George?
No, but like
Oh.
I was pushing it hard because Chris Preacher was like, the only way I'll ever come on is if you get Kit Williams, and I was like, send an email.
Worst he can say is no.
Yeah.
Like hit up his wife. I don't know if you want to go back down this. We've talked about it before. Graydon asks why we keep calling it a puzzle. The secret.
Because it is a puzzle.
We're the only ones that call it a puzzle. Byron never called it a puzzle. Called it a treasure hunt. Those are two completely different
That's
things.
true, but Masquerade was also a puzzle and a treasure hunt. So, I mean, the question would be to what extent he was influenced to create a treasure hunt in the first place. And even if you look at like pirate treasure hunts, did they not have cryptic clues about like how to find shit?
Yeah,
like,
but they
are we
I don't know that they had cryptic clues about other things that related to, like, I think the difference between a treasure hunt and a puzzle is a puzzle has cryptic clues that lead to knowledge outside of the verse itself, right? Or the words themselves. Like you have to know X from out here and to be able to apply that to a line to progress forward. Where within in a treasure hunt, you're like, I got to figure out where the shit around this X is, and then once I get to that, whatever's written on this text leads me to the X. Right? Does that
Well,
make
as far
sense?
as totally
right? Like decipher the map, decipher the clues.
Yes.
The directions.
As opposed to like something like Golden Apple Tail, where you have to know what different constellations are and apply the names of those constellations and the history of what they represent to the
Well,
puzzle.
but that's the thing. You need to know what different gemstones are, what different birth flowers are. Like, yeah, I mean, you could get away with the Farmer's Almanac, but
do you like Chicago?
Yeah, wait. That's not true. I mean,
It's true
guys
in my world.
Chicago, why did they need to know a birthstone in Chicago? Why did they need to know what type of flowers? Why did they even know,
So there's-
know the month?
there's a difference between getting to the end and and actually like doing it the way that it was intended.
Right, but we don't. That's the problem. We don't know how it was intended. Like I asked somebody in the Facebook group the other day, are we working Byron's puzzle or are we working our puzzle and making our puzzle work Byron's puzzle? Does that make sense? Right.
Yes.
So
well, I go back to
but having said that, that's devil's advocate. Completely agree with you.
Right? Because like, why include all of this stuff if
you don't need it.
if you don't need it?
Yeah.
Why is it there?
All right. So remember, there was going to be a book 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, seriously. So if there was going to be a book 2, there had to be hooks in book 1 already there to connect into book 2.
Why?
That's not necessarily
He
true.
would have done that.
Why?
That's not necessarily true. I think if anything, if a book 2 was coming out, it would have hooks in it that connected it to book 1. It wouldn't be the other way around, right? No sequel is ever made, or no original movie is ever made to conform to the sequel. You know what I'm saying?
not true. If you're writing a trilogy, if you're writing a, the guys in, doing Doctor Who, they put hooks in this episode for 2 seasons down the line.
Okay, I see what you're saying there.
Is
that done after the fact?
Fleshed out.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Is that not a hindsight
right?
thing as well? Like,
yeah.
I mean, so the easiest way to, I think, explain what he's saying to people who don't watch Doctor Who is, do you remember the show How I Met Your Mother? So for a while, a couple of seasons in, every single episode they had a number, and that, like, somewhere in the number on a calendar in the back, like on the background of the wall, was a poster that just said 48, and the next episode it said 47. All right, or there was a sign on a building that said 46, and then the next episode a newspaper said 45 or whatever, and when it got to 0, one of the characters had a kid, right? So it was shit in the future that they put in to build up to, something that would happen, or shit they put in to build up to something that will happen in the future, and I think that's what he's trying to say. But
and truth be told, that's in Cicada as well. Like, there's stuff from the 2012 puzzle that came into 2013. There's stuff from the 2013 that like played into 2014. Like it's a reasonable thing.
Yeah,
to do
just
for
as
the
an
puzzle.
author, if you know you're going to do number 2, and you want the things to merge together, okay, you don't have it written. You don't know what's going to happen, but you leave yourself nubs, okay, that are available for you now to work into the
pretty central nubs, though.
yeah,
There's 3 constants in every painting.
Yeah.
3 constants. Like, why go to that much trouble and effort for something that may or may not even happen?
What are the 3 constants in every painting?
there's a number.
There's a birth flower.
the gem.
There's a
There's
gem.
a flower.
There's a flower.
They all have gems. So
They all have gems. They all have a flower.
Flowers.
And they all have a time or a number.
Yeah, wait.
Number
All right, no, wait.
representation of the
They have a
number.
time or a number. They don't all have
It's a
plots,
representation of a month.
Yeah, the representation of the month is a number.
we think.
I mean, it would be a really weird coincidence if it wasn't.
If it wasn't the case.
Yeah, that would
See,
be.
I always go back to the James
Unless
Brennan
that is the
documentary.
piece that's supposed to drag us into connecting the image to the verse, and that's the thing they keep telling us we've never figured out.
So for Matt's sake, let's throw out the numbers. There are 2 constants in every painting. There is a gemstone and there is a flower. And both of those are the birth gemstone and the birth flower of a specific month. And we haven't
Correct.
figured out why that month is important, but it's the only constant in every single painting that month. And it seems central to the book. Like the things that represent it are central to the story itself, and we haven't figured out why.
Yeah,
And
I
the
mean,
litany, like
Unless there's some shadows.
the whole purpose of the litany is to call out the gemstones.
Yeah. To their specific cultures.
But right, all right, I agree with you. The whole purpose of the litany is to call out the gemstones. So there is nothing in the litany that works towards the puzzle.
No, I think the litany is a
The litany works
integral
as-
part of the puzzle.
I mean, the gemstones are what you find, but are they part of the puzzle? Is there
Yeah.
anything for the emerald in Chicago that helped us find the emerald,
Well, there's
In
I mean,
Chicago.
knowing that it's the emerald,
there's the pairing.
knowing there's an emerald
There's
in the picture?
There's the pairing of the emerald to the Irish. There's the pairing of the Purdue to the Italian. Like that was very integral in Boston.
yeah,
Those are-
exactly.
those are the-
And then you
There's the pairing
you
of
take the emerald from the litany to the Irish phase, and you take Ulysses by James Joyce to Ulysses Grant Park, and you've got this like whole Irish connection right there.
Yeah.
They didn't need to do it. They were Chicago locals. But if you were a kid in a library, you could piece that stuff together without having to be there, without needing to see the water tower.
Yeah.
But all right, so if I were gonna do a treasure hunt in Chicago, and it's like, how much of this stuff would just stumble into my treasure hunt because it's Chicago and Irish and people in Chicago, but is that really part of my treasure hunt?
I think it is, if you are starting this we're starting this and we're having this conversation with a lot of with a giant stepping stone. Like, we already know where we're supposed to be. We already know how to get there. I think if we just got this book and we had no experience with puzzles, and we were sitting in the 80s and we were just kids at a Scholastic book fair or whatever, or adults at a bookstore, right?
Yeah.
You need a stepping stone, and you need a way to categorize, and you need a way to organize these things. And I mean, for me, a lot of what the litany is a way to categorize stuff. It's not necessarily, I know Chris has, like, it follows through into the puzzles, but for me, not so much.
Does that help you solve the puzzle? Yes.
Yes,
okay.
But it
No,
does.
that's it.
It does.
Yeah, it does.
Solved by local knowledge. Period.
Yeah,
Period.
but is that
Well,
because
I think
something is missed?
Yeah.
Period.
And that doesn't, just because they were local and it was easier for them and they did it first. It's like, you can't solve it twice. There's not like the second person's going to come around and be like, oh, hey, I solved this too, and I'm in like Peoria. It's too late. It's done. It is past. People move on.
Yeah.
Right. But that doesn't mean that just because if take them out of the equation
People
and tell me that someone else couldn't have done it.
People are still arguing about Boston.
I mean,
Yeah,
if we remove
but that's not an argument.
If we remove these stepping stones, and imagine we're kids in the 80s and we've got this book and we figured out Italian Boston, or Italian and Massachusetts even, and we figured out Greek Cleveland, Ohio, because of the terminal tower, right? If we figured out and we looked for Greek in Cleveland, we would find the Greek Cultural Gardens, and that would start our path. If we were to have figured out Boston and Italian, even with our stepping stones, if we had put more focus on Italian for Boston, we would have focused on the North End, and that would have set our path.
That's all right. You're making sense. Yes,
I mean,
that is making sense.
I can't. We've always
not
said
how it's been done.
We've always said
but that makes sense.
We've always said Grant.
It doesn't matter how it's been done.
We've always said Grant was Irish, right? Whatever. That's
his like paternal great grandmother or something like that is.
When you think Irish Chicago, you think them dyeing the fucking river green, the river that's right next to the water tower, right? If you had found the water tower, you had found Irish, you would know you're in that area of town, at least.
All right, so apply that to one of the others.
I can't, because they're like.
Oh, dude, let's do it in Montreal, because that's a real fucking easy one to do it in.
The gold, yeah, okay.
Do it.
Right, okay, the calendula, also known as the marigold, is on the painting with the golden square, and the leg eater is in the golden square mile.
All right, yeah, okay, what's the calendula?
It's a flower.
It's a pot marigold.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a flower.
Yeah, it's a flower.
Okay.
It's the fucking birth flower, buddy.
Don't. It's Canada.
Don't be obtuse.
No,
you've been working this puzzle longer than anyone.
The absolute least about. So
yeah. In fairness, Montreal, we know nothing about it. I mean, I get your devil's advocating it, but you have to admit that there's something there that we don't know, right? And it's worthwhile going down the hole to see if we can figure it out, because any knowledge is helpful if we could just figure it out, even if it's just broad, even if it's just as simple and as broad as they dye the river green, and that's an event that everybody in America hears about, and that puts you right next to the water tower.
Well, I think San Francisco.
Like, it would be fair to assume that Byron has pretty in-depth knowledge of the United States, correct? And its history. He was a big Civil War guy, right? So when I read the litany and stuff like that and try to apply it to the rest of the puzzle, if you will, it's a good starting step, because, like you say, it talks about each gem in relation to its culture, right? So, brilliant as eyes of Celtic folk, the emeralds. Cold morning green, whatever, for Chicago, sorry. So then you would go through from there, presumably as a new person, go from there, look in the images, because probably by then you notice that they have the gems in them, correct? You would see those gems and then match them and think, okay, well, obviously puzzle or image, whatever it was, 4 or 5 is Chicago, because there's the same gem in this as there is in the litany verse, right? So as a very bare bones bottom end starting point, the litany gets you going, right? And from that, like you say, you kind of, if you know that that's going to end up being in Chicago, even Illinois is the state Chicago is in, correct? So, even if you kind of just understand that that particular state has a lot of that culture in it, then you're kind of already, that's a second step, or you know what I mean? Like you've taken the litany, moved it to the image, matched it to at least a state, you know what I mean? So yeah, like to kind of back up everything else,
But is that redundant? Because in the image in Castle Hat, there's a map of Illinois. There's the water tower.
Sure, but what if you didn't see those things?
Arena.
Well, think about it like this.
Because look at it from my perspective, Matt. I couldn't even tell you 100% that Chicago was in Illinois. So would I, as a searcher from Canada, be able to recognize Illinois in the picture? Probably not. But I would see the connection between the litany and the emerald in the image and try to go from there, right? Probably you'd see the Bulls logo or whatever people want to call that thing, but a lot of people say that it's the Bulls logo, and so on and so forth. So I think what it's doing is, yes, it might be redundant, but it's also just giving another way to start the puzzle for people that aren't from Chicago or from Illinois or from the States even, you know what I mean? Because he had to know that somebody wasn't going to know the cities and states as well as somebody that lives there, right? Like it's obvious that those that live in those particular states are going to see it a lot quicker than maybe Chris or I even might, because we're here in Canada. I don't know how long Chris has been in Canada for, but I mean, like I've lived over in Western Canada my whole life. So I don't know state shapes. I know Florida, I know California, and maybe Nevada, and that's it. Right. So it's like, for somebody who doesn't recognize Illinois, I see it there now because I've been shown it before in, talking to people and stuff like that, but I wouldn't have seen that. Right. So I think he's just giving you different ways to start the puzzle, because none of the verses and none of the images tell you, you have to start from here to get to here. Right. This is the location. These are things around it. This is how you can confirm those things, regardless of where you're starting.
Confirmation is important. One person's redundancy is another person's confirmation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And he's used redundancy in the past, like we were talking about before. I don't think Matt was on in the Charleston verse. Right. Freedom at the birth of a century or May 1913. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same monument.
It's just him getting out to a bigger market, right? Because if it was only supposed to be for kids in the United States, he wouldn't have even sold this book anywhere else.
He really didn't sell this book as
well, you know what I mean? Like he didn't really sell the book anywhere, but publish it is another story.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
All right, and like no disrespect, Matt. I don't mean to sound like I'm sitting here shitting all over your ideas.
Oh no.
That's how I see it from a guy that's a million miles from any cask ever. So like the closest to me is a 30. No,
I actually agree with you. But for the purpose of seeing if this is a decent argument, we have to shoot it down.
For sure.
We can.
Yes. Like I always said with my Dr. House theory, right? Just tell me why it can't be that.
Yeah.
And if you can't tell me
it's
that,
lupus.
Then it has to be
It's
that.
always lupus.
Yeah. Tell me why it can't be lupus. And if you can't do that, it's got to be lupus.
Can we, are we able, like as a group, to take a step back and imagine we don't have any of this information? Like I imagine if you were to get this book and you didn't know anything about it, the first thing you would want to do is categorize everything. You read the book and you're told, wet a painting with a verse. You've got 12 paintings, 12 verses. You have 24 pieces of information, and you have to categorize these.
But hold on, stop right there.
Okay.
You only want to categorize it because you think it's a puzzle. Right? I want to categorize it too because I think it's I think it's a puzzle.
So what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is,
warrants categorization.
What I'm saying is you want to match them. Right, you have 12 pieces of. You have 24 pieces of information.
It's like the only instruction we're given,
right?
Is to match them.
That's not what I did. I mean, you're asking if I can put myself in that position. I was in that position, right? I mean, I opened the book and
there's one instruction.
started looking at the pictures, and I got to this one, and that said to me either Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. Okay. So
you didn't follow the directions and you were wrong. That's
no,
fine.
God no, hell.
But if you
And
were to follow the
it
directions,
probably was a year before I actually could work my way through the rest of the book.
well, let's say you
Because
were.
it was so bad.
It's a slog. It's not an easy read.
Let's say you were to follow the directions. Match one painting with one verse. You make it 2 columns, right? 2 columns of 12. And you say, how do I do this? So the book kind of, how do I categorize them? And the book kind of tells you.
No, wait, that's what I did, to the point of one painting and then find the one verse. Ignore everything else.
Right, but what I'm trying to get at is let's do it the way the book tells us to do it.
Okay.
So you have two columns of 12, right? The book only gives you one way to categorize it, by a gem, right? So you make a column with the gem names, and you have 12 blanks next to them. You follow the litany, and that tells you which, essentially, like which immigration reference goes with that painting, right?
Yeah, with each month,
Right.
effectively.
Well,
right?
I don't know that you would know the month yet, right? I think you would figure that out once you start looking at the.
I think the flowers give you the
yeah,
month more than anything.
Well, no, because so many of the gems are blue, and in reality, those gems aren't actually blue.
Yeah.
Right? Like the topaz isn't blue, or the
Aqua-
Milwaukee one or whatever, like it isn't blue.
Yeah.
It's purple, and it's called purple in the litany, but it's blue in the painting.
Yeah.
That's the puzzle.
Well, also in the in the 80s, nobody was expecting photorealism in the colors. Okay. That did not happen in pictures until late 90s. That colors, if you were to get a different print, you got an entirely different set of colors. That was just a fact.
There's enough purple in the New Orleans painting that they could have made the amethyst purple if they wanted to.
So wait. let's follow the path a little more, right? Let's follow this path. So you don't know the month yet, right? And to Chris's point, you can't just match up the gems because the gems
you can't.
They're random.
You can't do it by color.
Yeah,
but the flowers you can.
So you would have to figure out how do I.
Before you even get to the flowers, because they're a little more hidden, you'd see the clocks.
Sure.
You would have to figure out how to categorize these gems. So mid to late 70s to mid to late 80s, birthstones were fucking huge. They were popular.
That's true. That's a fact.
Like I had birthstone rings and my grandmother bought me and shit.
Yeah.
That is a connection you would make, and you would try to figure out like, okay, so these are all birthstones. How do I figure out what month they represent?
Right.
And then you could start looking at the clocks. You could start looking at the numbers.
Well, that's easy. You pick up any Sears catalog and you got the birthstones and the months.
So
right.
And to clue you in on this, half of the paintings have clocks that give you the numbers right away. The other half don't. You have to kind of figure it out from there. Like you would see a pattern in 6, you would have to figure out how the pattern continues in the other 6. But once you figure that out, you have paintings associated with months in one column, and then you have a blank column for verses. I mean, if it's that structured to give you an order for the paintings, one would think there's a structure to give you the order for the verses in some way.
Right. But that's where it always, and people would build, trust me, everybody built that table. Okay. I built that table. Okay. And some people's tables were a little different depending what?
You mean Jason Olsen didn't invent that?
No.
I thought that was his, like exclusively. I love that guy.
But where it fell apart was connecting, and it's what we were all reaching really hard for, was great. Now we can take this picture and connect it to a verse. But that connection hasn't ever been found, to the point where I think he did his math wrong when he did it. But that's just my opinion.
I don't know. I think you can read into the verses in a way that absolutely makes sure you connect them with at least one line to their particular image. You know what
That's
I mean?
not what he said.
Yeah, no, and for me, I think it's all of the quotes and the references to men and all the verses are what are going to help us get to tying it to either a painting or a city. Because like what we've done with the paintings is now we've built this web of potential connections, like an extremely large Venn diagram of like things that relate to the birth month or gemstone, things that relate to the immigration group, things that relate to the city that we've like determined the painting to be. If we can find a way to map the verse to any one of those things in the web, we build the connection.
But then does that take, so I know a lot of people I've had arguments, like legit arguments where people got angry over things because of this, where like there's speculation that you could theoretically take any verse, put it next to any image and find a final location, whether or not it's one of the ones that we've all come to agree on.
You
I'm
totally
not sure,
You could.
but I think, yeah, absolutely you can. But that just goes to show you how vague everything is. You know what I mean?
All right. I mean, even
exactly, but it's not vague.
We're giving them credit for.
It's subjective.
Well, yeah, back in
it's the
90s,
way that the reading.
We had verse 7 associated with New Orleans and verse 6 associated with San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then after a whole lot, I mean, 2 or 3 years of arguing, verse 7 was San Francisco. Okay. Looking back on it now, every clue that made me say verse 7 is obviously San Francisco, right, is wrong. Now, we found other clues that actually do match, right? But the reason in the 90s where we said, okay, verse 7 is San Francisco, yep, it's obvious, none of that was accurate. So, you know, the high poster 3 is obviously, you know, the tower, the big tower with the 3, you know, Sutro Tower. Okay. Well, that was great. And it was very hard to argue until we found out that the 3 posts are wood. So it ain't Sutro Tower, you know. So there was all these fundamental understandings we came up with in the 90s to associate all these verses that if we actually look back at them, they're wrong. So,
yeah, but that's because you were interpreting lines in a certain way and using that to like back into the verse pairing.
Well, we actually got to the point where we had the pictures really close to all the right cities. That was the easiest thing to do, right? So people, except for St. Louis and
Montreal,
Pittsburgh, people don't argue really those kind of things. But the verses were the last things to actually finally sort of get lined up. And even though we pretty much got them right, definitely back then, we were wrong in how we did it.
You know what seems odd to me? Like Byron released the Japanese book, right? Or something for Tommy or whatever. But he gave an interview and he gave a bunch of hints. And so far, everything that's in the back of the book, or that's in the hint section, I don't want to say the back of the book, everything that's in the hint section of that book has turned out to be accurate.
Yes.
And he tells you to start the puzzle using the verses. He tells you if you want to figure this out, you have to start with the verses. You don't end there.
But to take the numbers from the verses and somehow, and I forget the exact wording, take the numbers from the verses to get to the painting.
Yeah. So there's something there. We just haven't figured it out.
We haven't figured it out.
Why don't we try? Let's try 90.
I think we're close. I think he did his math wrong.
That's the point of these conversations, isn't it? Is to try to find things to move forward, right?
Yeah. So
let's take a number, the 4 of us, discuss it, and see what we can come up with.
We're getting yelled at a lot by Ben Spirator, who says, no, start with the paintings. Well, Byron said start with the verses. So
yeah.
Listen to Byron. I mean, that's like...
That's probably why my whole openings theory thing that I posted the other day didn't respond so well, because everybody wants to always start with start with the painting first, then move verse, then painting verse. But you got to do it all kind of at the same time.
Well, the image is the most subjective thing. You can look at
exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like right back to your point earlier, Cole. Like you can put any verse with any painting and come up with connections.
That's what
that's what makes these things so hard.
That's what our brains are built to do, to look at something and look at something and figure out what it is.
When was 918 discovered to be the train?
Whenever Mark came around.
Yeah, that was all Mark.
Yeah.
Mark. Doesn't matter who he is. When was that? Like that was
93, 90,
a long time ago.
Early 90s?
Yeah. 94. I mean, he was working on it long before he said to us he was working on it.
Because arguably the hardest number to decipher out of the whole puzzle is what? Chris, help me out here.
Arguably the hardest what?
222.
There you go. That's the one, right? Like, you know.
I keep saying it's going to be obvious, and people argue about that. Do you, Chris, agree that the Japanese book put the order of the 0 and the 2 to rest? Because while in the
like they're three separate numbers.
They're three separate numbers. 2.
They're three separate numbers.
20 and 2.
Yeah.
Because it's written out that way in the Japanese book.
Well, let's go back to what Byron said. So to the Japanese translator, Byron said, start with the verses. To the, I don't remember which article it was or whatever, but to the disabled child in a wheelchair in a library can solve these things. How are you going to solve it in a library? You're going to start with the verses. You're going to start with the words, and you're going to try to like pull out what is objective in the verses that you can get. Like if we put subjectivity aside, what can we pull out of these verses?
I think you would start with quotes.
Exactly. You would start with the quotes, because the quotes are it's either taken from Sarmiento or it's not. It's either taken from Melville or it's not.
Did he say to because I'm totally not aware of this, did he say to a little kid in a wheelchair, you know?
I can't remember if he said that or if I know John said that, because
Kit Williams said that.
But also
John said that to me. He was like, the point was a little kid, a disabled kid in a wheelchair, or a disabled kid in a library could solve it, and I was like, there's no.
But you also got to remember too, I think back to the James Renner documentary, and when his daughter was talking about how like Byron would tell her that he thought the puzzles were really easy, and her opinion was, of course he thought that, he made them, right? So for Byron, if it was anybody else in the cast of characters that made this book that came out and said anybody in a library could fix this, or anybody that is 15 could figure it out, Byron said it because he made the puzzles, and in his mind they were very easy, right? And we've discussed at length before whether or not but that meant Byron was a good puzzle maker or not. I think that question sort of becomes irrelevant in a sense, but I think back to that where she was like, of course he thought they were simple, right? But they're not. Like, they're very complex. JJP said in one of the interviews you did just after EU that they're not difficult, they're complex, right? And that is two very different nomenclatures, if you will, right? So I think
it's the other way around. Complex means like intertwined, and hard means just like
difficult,
challenging.
He used another
right?
word.
Like they're challenging, but they're not like a messy web or like a braided thing of a million connections.
Well, and while his daughter said, his daughter definitely is
biased.
Well, no, I mean she can definitely tell us what he said. Okay. Yeah. But once she gets past he said they're simple.
She said
there was her opinion, and she doesn't know.
Graydon corrected you guys in the comments. It's complex, not complicated. That's what he said. They're complex, not complicated.
Good. Yeah,
that's what I was saying.
I like that.
That's essentially what I was saying. They're not difficult, they're complex.
So going off what you said, Chris, about going back to the thesaurus, can you think of any line, any quote from these that's not directly related to a dig, not a dig site, but directly related to the site where either we assume these can you think of any line that's not helpful once you figure out what the line's talking about or where it came from? Like the Melvin quote, once you know Herman Melville, you can associate that with Herman Park. The cold as glass, once you know that's about a railroad, you can associate that with the 982. The quotes about Charleston gives you a city. The quotes about New Orleans gives you a city.
We don't know that though. Okay, we do
I mean,
know Chicago. No, we do know Chicago. We know Cleveland. We know Boston.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Boston, we start with the Walpole quote,
Thucydides. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that
okay.
gives
Start
you
with
the
Paul
north end
Revere.
of Boston.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. I know.
right? Like, yeah, and
I agree with your premise, George. But
Well,
you can't use things we haven't found to prove it.
Sure, we can. We can use
Sure.
commonalities in the three that are solved to assume with a very, very high degree of certainty that they are the same in the other puzzles, right? Especially
Yes.
if we have a
Yes, you
pretty
can
good
do
idea
that.
of what they are.
You got to. You
So,
can't.
If we can
prove
take
it.
the quote, the quote about Thucydides and Xenophon, if we find that quote, that line not only gives us the correct city, but the correct part of the city to start in, right?
And if you go and find that quote and it says there will be a new Augustan age, that is both Italian and August in the quote too.
Yeah.
And like, as challenging as a quote that would be to find, to do all those things in one.
So,
One book.
But so there you go.
Bartlett's.
One quote from the verse has
That one
suddenly
is in Bartlett's, which makes it easier.
Well,
It's in Bartlett's.
if we had created that column before and we had said, what's the August puzzle, right? We know it's this. We know it's this painting because we figured out the month, right? So what's the August painting? If we had figured out that quote, all of a sudden, boom, there it is. That's correct.
Yeah,
that's one of
at
12
that point
done.
it's indisputable.
Yeah.
And similarly with when we get into Melville, like not even jumping to Herman Park, assuming we don't know anything about Texas, if we find that quote also in Bartlett's, it's the thing that falls gently is the leaf, and there's only one painting with leaves in it, and the leaf is the larkspur, which is the birth flower.
Okay,
So, like,
here we're going to get into arguments about interpreting,
Well, it's
because
a little less direct.
Falls Gently is from the Melville book, the whatever that other book was, and it's actually
Pierre.
about fountains. And there's a fountain in the picture.
I mean, the book's about fountains, but the quote is about
the quote says, the quote is about the falling of a leaf,
I could probably
right?
read you the quote.
It's yes, please do, because I didn't.
Or I'm
bring
thinking, no,
my
I'm thinking
Bartlett's
about
to
the,
make sure I quote myself properly.
I'm thinking about the other quote, Towers of Delight. Sorry.
Yeah, that
So-
is the quote.
Yeah, so here's the quote.
What we take to be
What we take to be our strongest tower of delight only stands at the caprice of the minutest event, the falling of a leaf, at the hearing of a voice, or the receipt of one little bit of paper scratched over with a few small characters by a sharpened feather. That's the quote.
So what we take to be our strongest tower of delight falls gently. What falls? The leaf.
Fall of the leaf. Yeah.
So there's two. Kind of.
And does the Larkspur connect to December at all?
No, it does not. Not to my. I have no knowledge of that, but the
The
larkspur
next
is
line is
represented in the
December
leaves
night,
of the
so-
trees. So,
Let's look up Larkspur.
but I mean, the
Okay.
the falls gently in December night takes us back to the earlier conversation about what lines go with which other lines.
Yes. Yeah, that's true, because it could say in December night, looking back from the treasure ground, there's the spout. But this has been an invigorating
What
conversation.
what is the month for Houston? Is it June? July?
July.
Yeah.
July,
So what, Cole, didn't you just ask if the Larkspur had anything to do with July? It's
No,
No, December.
December.
Oh.
Because the next line is
Oh,
in
because
December.
it's
night,
December,
right?
yeah.
In December night.
But you were about to go on something, so go with that.
No, I was just saying it's the birth
Oh,
flower.
yeah,
It's either that or the water lily.
yeah.
So we have two. Arguably, it works the same in Montreal because you talked about it earlier. So you have three.
So I understand Cole is an incredible typist, so he should actually type all this up for us into one big document. So
Into it, I'll
As long as he
transcribe
puts
it.
my name on that theory, because I've already typed it. I've
Where
already
is
put
it?
it out into the world.
Yeah, no, I know. I would never take from your.
No,
Well, did
I'm
you
just
use
teasing
the?
you.
Yeah, I guess you did use the quotes.
We had a whole episode where I sort of
Yeah.
laid it out, but I actually haven't typed it up yet. which
No,
is
you did. There's a chart.
Well, Cole's
Did
a
I?
good typist, so just
It used to
send
be
it
on the
over
website.
there and he'll put your name.
I don't know if
That's
it's
don't
still on your
patronize me.
website or not, but it used to be.
I know it. Yeah,
I think I have a
I
copy
got
of
it.
it around here somewhere.
yeah. I've sent it all to archive.org too. No, but let's do the next one.
All
I
right.
feel like we just did this a few weeks ago, but
I mean, yeah, but whatever.
We're just elaborating on
you know,
it, right?
we can do it. So we say we find the Sarmiento quote in verse 2.
What about verse 8? Everybody wants to talk about verse 8 all the time.
The irony is like even with all this, I can hit all of them, and I'm still not clear on the full verse 5 versus verse 8. I'm not in a position where I'm willing to put a stake in the ground. But
I mean,
Am
dude,
I the only one who
granite
is-
walls. Are you fucking serious right now?
but that's the thing, man. It's still an interpretation, and
I guess.
and as much as I love it, and as much as I think it is correct, it still could be the Sutro Tower not being made of wood. Like it there's a minute chance
Yeah.
that
So-
it's not that,
So maybe
right?
Maybe we can.
I have
If he had
to.
capitalized walls, would that have confirmed that thing? Like if he'd have written walls with a capital W,
Yeah, but that would have been too big of a.
That would've been
I
too
think that
easy.
was a bit of a stress, but it's I always have to leave slight room for the possibility,
yeah.
Yeah.
especially
Speaking of
because
verse 8 is interesting because we were talking about numbers before and the importance of the numbers, and verse 8 has so many numbers in it, right? 92, 200, 100, fifth,
So
3, staying west.
So let's keep going with that. With what verse is Charleston?
2, isn't it? Or that's image 2. Charleston is like
6.
6.
Yeah. So that's kind of screws up this theory, because if you're gonna look for quotes in this verse, the first thing you're gonna find is
Treasure Island.
the hesitant purchaser, and that leads
The
you
interesting-
nowhere near Charleston.
The interesting
quote
thing
from
is if you break down that quote and you think of who are the men of tales and tunes based on that quote, the answer is sailors.
Pirates.
Yeah, but sailors
No, if you read the hesitating
Okay.
purchaser,
Yeah, yeah.
it's of right. It's so the answer is the men of tales and tunes are sailors.
Right.
Whether they're pirates or not is like secondary, but that's what you would take from that if we're taking the same interpretation. So then, like, what the hell do I do with sailors?
I mean, I think it specifically calls them pirates. It calls them.
No, it says
dead
of sailors tales, and
if sailors' tales to sailor tunes, blah blah blah. But the whole poem is about pirates.
right. But
All my
of
pirates
all-
share the grave where these and their creations lie.
But think of this: of all the romance retold, like think of the lines that he chose and the lines that he didn't choose, because he
Right.
didn't put the whole quote in there and he didn't reproduce it verbatim.
Right.
But of all the romance retold, men of tales and tunes, cruel and bold, seen here by eyes of old. So there's like, if you want to deconstruct this a lot, what are the things that we can do? We can ask, what is romance retold? We can ask, who are the men of tales and tunes? We can ask, where are we seen here? What is the here that he's talking about? Where is that? And what is eyes of old?
Well, and
Right. Those are the questions that we can ask.
Here's my first question to you: should we be using this quote in the same way that we were using the other ones? Because this is in no way a quote. We just know because it's similar, but it is not actually a quote. If you were to look up any of these lines,
it's parts of a quote.
it's not really
Yeah,
even parts. It's sort of says
yes.
the same thing, kind of uses
This
some of the
this
same
word
words.
from here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah.
Like no line in this is verbatim in that poem. They're not even close. They just sort of sound kind of like of all.
But
the
you got to look at
romance
what it's
retold-
talking about.
Of like the most common thing is of all the romance retold, but the line in the verse is and all the old romance retold, right? Like
Of all,
if you
Yeah. He takes the old and moves it like down
Yeah,
to the fourth line.
to put it in 2022 perspective, if you were to take any of these lines and Google them, aside from the secret, you're not going to find the hesitant purchaser, probably. You know what I'm saying? So should we? Is it just sort of an added sort of flavor, or should we be using this the same way that we use like the Edwin and Edwina, or
I think
to build
we
palaces
found
to
it.
hide their
Question.
shelter
And-
to shelter their heads for the night.
You know what you got to think about too is that particular section of the verse, you could basically extend it to the line where he says, "Hear the cool, clear song of water." All those lines, that's what 7 lines, basically brings up the idea of pirates. Okay, because what is the thing that sits on top of the mast of those old ships? Remember where the lookout is? They used to call those a bird's nest or a crow's nest, right? So cruel and bold.
Oh, I like that.
Stand and listen to the birds, right? Hear the cool, clear song of water. So if you're up there with the birds and you're out on the ocean, right? And considering that this is Charleston, which in a sense is we're looking at in hindsight because we think we know that's the combination. It makes you. There's a lot of water around Charleston. Between Charleston and Sullivan's Island, between Charleston and that Fort Sumter or whatever it's called, there's lots of water around that area, right? So I think that part is making you think treasure hunting. What do pirates go after? They go after treasure, right? And like for me particular, and I don't normally do this very often because I don't like to be criticized, but I've often theorized that this puzzle leads you to the Goldbug Island, which comes from from Edgar Allan Poe's The Goldbug. But also there's like the Treasure Island references, right? And so just makes you think about pirates, right? So find an area that kind of talks about pirates and things like that, and maybe that would be Charleston. But then you got to think, so we already discussed how the quote that we get Romance Retold and the Men of Tales and all that from is kind of disseminated in a sense, like it's kind of pulled apart and only specific parts of it are being used, right? But then we have the line "hearken to the words" with an actual colon on the page. I didn't just draw that in my own book. There's actually a colon there. Hearken to the words, freedom at the birth of a century, is like saying, read a quote, right? Hearken to words means those words have already been said and you should listen to them, or you should reference
And
them.
he says, hear, listen, and hearken all in 3 lines.
Exactly.
And those are all synonyms. So
Yeah.
hearing or listening or something has something to do with this verse.
Assuming you're correct, Cole, like this part of the verse is just getting you to think about pirates. The verse clues actually start at freedom of a birth of a century. You've cut out the top almost half of the verse.
I don't
is
think
fine.
so.
I mean,
no, it's not fine. Think of this one like we thought about verse 3. You were like, if you can find the quote and figure it out, you can end up in the north end of Boston. From that, how many people wrote off the Walpole quote and as fluff or whatever for how long and didn't get to the north end of Boston? Like this one, as much as this is manipulated from the original, it still says seen here by eyes of old. If you can figure out what eyes of old are, and you can find where eyes of old is seeing sailors, I bet you find the cask.
Well, we had that all figured out for verse 6 and Portsmouth Square in San Francisco, and it didn't.
Yeah, but then you're working outside of the boundaries of the puzzle.
But you didn't have a date written in stone or written in iron in San Francisco, right? If you assume that this is just telling you to imagine pirates, right, and then telling you, hey, focus on these next words. These next words are important. We already know, like, there's no argument that these next words are carved in a monument in White Point Gardens, or at least they used to be. So we know, pay attention to this shit here. We're putting you right here at this monument. If you look to your left, there's a monument to dead pirates. Like, you could throw a baseball and hit it. You're in the right spot. So that's what I was saying with Cole. Like, I get it.
Well,
like,
I mean, in the corner of Portsmouth Square, there's the monument dedicated to Robert Louis Stevenson.
You got a monument that says May 1913 on it too?
No, it's Ross says Robert Louis Stevenson.
Just like, I know it's got the big
golden
boat
but
on it.
There's a book about Robert Louis Stevenson describing him sitting in Portsmouth Square, eyed by all the old Chinese people because he was a white guy sitting in.
It's okay to be wrong. That's what I'm saying. It's okay to be wrong. You can
And
have
then you're also
Good,
going like
good. I
the number of
appreciate that.
layers
Community.
That
Tell that
works.
to the
indirection.
community.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying, like, you got two things, right? You've got your pirates, you've got your May 1913. Your May 1913 is written in iron. We can't argue that. We just can't. Like, so you're in a spot. Like, what now? I mean, I guess I don't know. If you were to find that quote, you would be given Charleston. Either if you were to find the Edwin and Edwina.
The Edwin and Edwina quote gives you
That
Charleston.
would give you Charleston.
And the painting,
Okay,
the painting
'cause
gives you
no,
Charleston.
right next to Portsmouth Square, there is a brass plaque on what used to be an old theater that said Edwin Booth, performed here.
But this is the same issue of your high poster 3, right? You're interpreting the clues first and backing yourself into pairing. And it doesn't work that way. It only works one way. There's only one correct pairing.
Right. Well, no, I was just saying, so George has said a couple times, if we found out that was, the Robert Louis, we knew that Robert Louis Stevenson quote back in GeoCities.
Yeah.
If not just after.
I remember GeoCities.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really old. That's pre-2003.
Right, and I could,
Okay.
but I could see how you would associate it with San Francisco, but
no, you know what we associated it with? Not pirates, not San Francisco, not Charleston. We associated it with Robert Louis Stevenson.
right. But your problem with this was you associated this one section, and because that one section seemed legitimate, you started trying to find associations for the other things instead of figuring out where all of it makes sense, right? The concrete answer for the entirety of the verse, right? Of all the like you can say there's
had links to every part of the verse.
Listen, you can say of all the romances were told, whatever, Robert Louis Stevenson statue right across the street is an Edwin Booth or Edward Booth, whatever. There's a Booth monument.
John Wilkes Booth monument.
What the hell does May 1913 have to do with it? That you would lose it right there, and it's no longer valid. Like you would have to go and figure out.
No, you're right. Except at the birth of the new century was there.
But May 1913 wasn't, and in Charleston they're both there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, but we did have a link for at the birth of a new century.
I would really like to know what that monument.
But that goes back to the
verse.
vagueness.
You want to know what, George?
I would love to know what the entirety of that plaque said, the main monument plaque. I don't think I've ever seen a picture of it. I just know that it said May 1913.
Yeah, I feel like it's been shared. I feel like
didn't they show it in EU?
Yeah, but they only showed the May 1913 part.
Oh.
But see, that section of the verse is interesting because of the two oars in the within a couple lines of each other, it's giving you a couple different ways. Like I would almost argue that particular part of the verse between hearken to the words and or on the eighth the scene, part of that is a throwaway line in a sense. Like if you can't find freedom at the birth of a century or May 1913, then look for Edwin and Edwina on the eighth the scene, right, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I looked at it more as like not allegorical, but descriptive versus concrete. May 1913 is on this monument, but it's kind of small.
Yeah, it's also on site, right? Like freedom at the birth of a century, maybe you could figure that out from not being on site.
Well, the
one or the other.
Yeah.
Again, trying to make it so that people that aren't there
on site, eighth of a scene,
figure it out. Yeah.
But I still use that argument, but I fail to see what Edwin and Edwina has to do with on an eighth a scene. You know, I can't.
I had a theory once that was a wordplay theory when it came to that line. And I think it's a bummer John's not here because I actually brought it up to him, I think the first time I ever talked about it. So a lot of people will argue that the Charleston puzzle has something to do with Edgar Allan Poe and the Gold Bug story, because Gold Bug Island is just north of Sullivan's, right, which is coincidentally enough, just west of the Palms Island, Ile de Palm, right? So could theoretically be Long Palm Shadow, right? But Edwin and Edwina, if you look at the way names are written and collected in an alphabetical type of order or in like an etymological type of order, Edgar will always come before Edwin and Edwina. So literally, Edwin and Edwina are named after Edgar. Those names would come. Like if you put names that start with ED in a series of alphabetical orders, Edwin and Edwina will always come after Edgar, right? So in a sense, I was saying that those names were hearkening back to Edgar Allan Poe.
And that's the difference between a puzzle and a treasure hunt. Because in a treasure hunt, you're looking for Edwin and Edwina. Where is it? And in a puzzle,
so my best thing for on an 8th, the scene where Law defended, I would have to combine those two. Well, I really wouldn't, but logically knowing what I'm about to say, you would combine those two. Are if you're standing at the main monument and you're looking to your left and you're seeing the pirate statue, and you're looking to your right, you're seeing the Confederate Defenders Monument. And on that monument is one scene around sort of an octagon or whatever. I don't remember how many sides an octagon has.
Octagon, yes. On the
it
eight,
has 8 sides. It's one scene that wraps around 8 sides. And if you were to walk up to the front of that monument, the best fucking part is there are words staring at you on this monument. Big black letters that just says count them. Like the first
on the
word,
monument?
On the monument. The quote, I forget the quote, but it says like count them among the blah 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 blah. And you have to read all the way around. But the first thing you see when you walk up are the words count them. And if you were to count them, you would see one scene depicted on 8 sides. So on the 8th, one scene where Law defended Confederate defenders.
Crazy. See, I looked at that one as, because I think it's at, and again, I don't normally do this sort of thing, but for the purposes of this exercise, I'm comfortable with it. I looked at that as so my bar that binds is a bridge. It's Ben Sullivan's bridge. Or what the hell is the guy's name? I forget. Ben something. I think it is Ben Sullivan. Anyways, he fought for the law in Charleston for quite some time, around 1913. Like there was some time, I think it was like 1915 or something like that. But that bridge to me is the bar that binds. And when you get across that bridge from Sullivan's Island, there's nothing but sand and seashells, right? Like oyster shells and things like that. Right. So embedded in the sand waits the fair remuneration. So once you cross that bar that binds, beside the Long Palm Shadow, which is, in my opinion, Sullivan's Island, because it's right next to the Ile de Palms, you're kind of all right there. Do you understand what I'm saying?
My only response to that would be if you look at any of the 3 solved puzzles or anything that we assume to be correct in any of the unsolved puzzles, can you point me to one line that's not direct? One line that we assume to be correct. One line that's not direct. One line.
What do you mean by direct?
That's not.
Yeah,
iron,
it's like
iron,
one.
It's not
there's
metal,
one layer.
Yeah, metal
right?
walls, iron sides.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Socrates, Pindar, and Apelles on a wall. May 1913 on a monument.
M and B.
M and B.
M and B. Yeah.
Words on stone.
R L.
Yeah.
Congress,
that's my biggest thing when people come to me and say this represents this thing that I found in a book. Yeah, but in all the other puzzles, this represents something you can see. Right? You don't really have to. I don't know, but then it goes back to
the layers you get away from where you started. If you're 2 or more, you're in murky territory.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the argument always becomes none of these are solved the same way.
Right.
Exactly. We have some precedent, and we have like, but we don't have
some kind.
Yeah, we don't have like proof to say that it's not, but we have some evidence to say that there hasn't been more than like one layer of indirection between
there are
the answer
of averages
there.
There are a lot of puzzles that require you to take steps like that. But those puzzles tend to give you fences, right? They don't go out of this kind of area. That one thing leads to another in a very like concrete and self-referential way, right? So you know you're on the right path. And in this one, you have no idea. Once you go one step away from the puzzle, you have no idea if you're on the right path. You go one step beyond that, you're just screwed, right? It has to be sort of concrete in order for it to work. Otherwise, this is just an unsolvable puzzle, and we're wasting our time.
It's constant.
I mean,
But you
is
got
that
it.
not the case anyways?
I mean, yeah, but at least we're having fun.
Yeah, and great conversations.
Graydon brought like they're talking about the 5 steps in Boston, and that's a good like I still have I have no clue what that means. Take 5 steps in the area of his direction. I have no idea.
And I don't, as a guy that reads a lot, that always confuses me. And I wish somebody could tell me otherwise. So we know the quote, right? We know the quote says, if Thucydides is north of Boston or whatever, there'll be a Boston in, or whatever. We know how the quote works. Okay.
We know the quote. We don't
Paraphrasing.
exactly know it.
Yeah.
We can't say it.
Apparently I don't know it at all, but I get it. And the thing is that like so let's replace those names. Okay. I'm going to use Chris and George. If George is north of Chris,
It's the other way around. Chris is north of George.
Sorry, if Chris is north of George, right, take 5 steps in the area of his direction. If I was doing punctuation on this, I would put a period right there. And what that sentence would say to you, and again, I realize that by doing that, we make it our own thing. I am trying to avoid that, but I'm just saying to you, literally, if you read it like that, Chris is north of Xenophon, take 5 steps in the area of his direction. Chris was the first subject, so that's who they're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thucydides in Boston.
Wait.
So it says take 5 steps in the area of his direction, means north. Like if Xenophon represents New York and Thucydides represents a place north of that, and it says take 5 steps in his direction, all that's saying is take 5 steps north.
But literally
in the north area.
No, literally, not literally. I'm speaking in terms of writing things out. Like
literally,
yeah.
That quote is effectively, do bears shit in the woods? The answer is yes.
Great.
Okay,
So take 5
literally,
steps to the
that
area
is
of the
a
bear shit.
that is a yes question.
But puzzlerily, this quote gives you
And like
Again, you just go
this
right to
quote gives you
Bartlett's.
a month, and this quote gives you an area of a town. Like it gives you a month, a city, and an area of that city. It gives you 3 different things. And
Exactly.
that take 5 steps in the area of his direction, it's combined with 2 very important lines above it. You would assume that those 2 lines are also very important. What the hell does it mean? It would have to be at the start, right? It would have to be like north end of Boston, something 5 to get you to this obscure park.
Right,
to get
and
you
if
to,
we
or
back-
to get you to home plate, like wherever you are, you're 5 steps away
it could be.
from home plate.
It could be that. Like it could be where, because everything in this verse seems to happen right at home plate, right? Everything is either to the front of you, to the right of you, to the left of you, or behind you. So
What
I guess
direction
it
does
could
that
be.
home plate face?
It's like it's not exactly north. It's like
It's like
northeast-ish.
northeast.
But it's
Now,
not
when you say that, do
exactly
you mean the
northeast.
flat side, the flat top of the home plate, or the pointed part of the home
Well,
plate
the
that's
pointy,
facing downward?
the pointy part of the home plate, like the ball field doesn't exactly point north. It points
No.
like northeast a little bit.
Yeah.
But vague enough where you're looking at you're going to assume when you're standing there, oh, north is this way somewhere. So like in a vague sense, if we're not relying on, we don't have a compass.
A
we just be
compass,
like
yeah.
north is that way.
So Cole, you put a period at the end of direction, but I'll bring you back to the conversation about the ballad stanza, and I'll let you know that Xenophon and direction rhyme, and that could be a way for us to understand that these 4 lines go together.
That's debatable. I think direction rhymes better with
Wait,
section.
let's split this up a little bit. Because you just said something that blew my mind. So let's stop combining take 5 steps in the area of his direction. If Thucydides is north of Xenophon, take 5 steps. Let's throw out 5 steps because we have no idea what that means, right?
Sure.
In the area of his direction are a green tower of lights in the middle section, near those who pass, the Colosseum with metal walls, face the water. In the area of his direction is everything below it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So if we don't combine those 2, in the area of his direction, it makes sense to just describe everything around you.
Yeah.
In the north area, here's all these
everything.
things. Fuck, that's good.
Yeah.
I like
Where do you
that.
find all these things at once?
Oh yeah.
And then 18th day, 12th hour, limp by lamplight, and truth be free. That makes sense because it puts you in a specific part of the north end. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be reliant on finding the cask. It's like, okay, where in the North End do I need to go find these things? Okay, somewhere near Paul Revere, right?
Yeah, but and that's another quote that also gives you Boston. So like you could presumably use that if you've determined that the August painting is Boston by the longitude, latitude, or
people
because
are
you're so smart, you figured out Boston pops.
People are talking about Freedom Trail in the comments. Just let me say, I've researched the hell out of the Freedom Trail, and the Freedom Trail was not like, it didn't have officially numbered stops, right? Like different tours would take things in different directions, and like stop 5 in one place on one tour would be stop 8 on another. Back in the 80s, there were just nothing that I can find.
Somebody just put up a 1980 map of the Freedom Trail.
Yeah,
but
if you go to
it's
another,
a little different than today.
If you go to
but
another
it still
tour
takes
company,
you from Faneuil Hall to Copp's Burial Ground in 5 steps.
Okay, I'm sure it does, but
there's other things in between.
What I'm saying is like other maps show different. Like I can't find. I found a lot of different maps that number them a lot of different ways, and it's really hard to find like tourist maps from a specific time. Yeah. But I found a lot of them that number them in different ways.
But most of those number changes are below Faneuil Hall.
Okay.
There's only every time I've seen it, there's only been 5 stops north of Faneuil Hall.
I would agree with you that is the case, but what I'm saying is we're numbering a tour when the Freedom Trail doesn't necessarily need a number. It doesn't always start down here. Sometimes it starts up here, and
it doesn't say 5 numbers. It says 5 steps.
Right. Steps defined by whom is what I'm saying. Those steps are defined by somebody, generally a tour company, and they're not always the same.
Well, actually, I would say the things on the ground on the Freedom Trail probably rather than a map, because you're there, and there were plaques stuck in the ground.
Yeah, but the plaques didn't say step 1 or stop 1.
No, they didn't, because it was actually step 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21.
Does Chris and Cole understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
I get what you're saying.
I think Matt's just arguing every point.
I am. That is exactly it. I get what you're saying. But however you cut it, whether you call them steps, stops, places, there were 5 of them.
If we're assuming it's the Freedom Trail, if we're assuming it's the Freedom Trail, then that's the only line for the Freedom Trail, and you just kind of have to assume. That line should mean something. Every other line means something. That line should mean something. It should mean something specific, and you should understand it. Like, now that we know the spot, we know what the Coliseum is. We know what the metal walls are. We know what the water is. We know where the stairs are. We know what home is. We know what all the letters are. We know all of this. And there's really no argument. We should know what the 5 steps are. It shouldn't be vague. It shouldn't be like the Freedom Trail. Because how do I take those steps? Who's numbering the 5? We should know. Like, take 5 steps.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And it should probably be within sight of there. That's true.
I mean, I like Chris's take. Like, if you're in the center of all of these things, take 5 steps like into the park. But I don't like home plate's more than 5 steps.
What if it's take 5 steps? Like take 5 means like take a break steps. I have no idea.
Take 5, the candy bar.
I think steps is
take 5.
Like Cleveland, it says 7 steps up you can hop. Right, that's literally 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're on the box, right? I don't think he would change that between puzzles. Personally, like I don't like to speculate on what Byron would or wouldn't do. But honestly, if he wanted this to be solved at all, you're not going to take something like the word steps and make it mean something 12 different ways. You know what I mean? Like 12 steps was 12 steps, or 7 steps was 7 in Cleveland. 5 is 5 in this one. Yeah. You showed us where the actual.
I've always been curious.
In verse 8, he says, "Ascend the 92 steps," which we believe to be stairs.
Yeah.
So if he's saying,
what do you do on stairs?
If he's saying 7 steps up in Cleveland, and he's saying 92 steps here, like what he saying steps, looking at those verses, he's saying that steps are stairs.
Everybody in the comments is arguing about this. Like, I think Sunday just
of course they are
5 flights of the Cops Hill Terrace, but flights of stairs are not like 5 flights of stairs are not 5 steps.
No.
Well, he does.
I often wonder, this park was renovated, and we don't know exactly when this was buried. We don't know if it was before, after, or during the renovation, because it was right around the same time this was buried. I often wonder if this, because this park's a little elevated, I wonder if there were steps to it. If there were steps
remember,
into or down.
He does put us in an exact spot before you go out and dig the thing. He says what? He says, face the waters, you're back to the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. Maybe there were 5 steps up to the level of the, I don't know. That would be perfect if there were.
But he specifies.
Can someone find
That's
that? Can someone in the comments go deep dive?
He legitimately says stairs versus steps, right? In the same verse.
And expanding on that, if we're talking about the Cops Hill Terrace as the stairs, you're back to the stairs, and you face the water, you're in a completely different place. Like you're no longer facing north, you're facing west almost.
Yeah.
And that's why I think
if you're looking at the water at home plate, Cops Hill Terrace is on your right.
Yeah.
I think I'd have to look at Google Earth.
George, do you want to let Graydon on?
I don't care.
He's chomping. He wants to
Graydon,
come in. He's got.
Do you have the you have the Zoom link still? Just shoot it.
Oh yeah,
I'm good to go for a little while.
He's got some.
I have to. I'm going to be right back.
He's got some strong opinions.
That's fine. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I can't see both at the same time. I'm using my phone,
Yeah.
so I have to refresh the comments every time. So I
Wait,
can be up
George,
there.
come back.
For the record, this is probably my favorite Sunday Fun Day we've had so far.
Is George let anybody share by any
What is
chance?
going on there?
Yeah. Oh, we got a screen share.
Okay, cool.
Who's
You
sharing
see the
their
map,
screen?
right? Okay. Boston.
Matthew, is this your screen?
This is my screen.
Okay, I was like, whose computer is on my computer?
I am to do not touch that dial. I am taking over. All right. So 78. So that's it in 1978.
Where's the
Okay.
cask in 1978?
Right. Well, all right. There it is in 95. Right.
Go to like 80. Oh, I guess 75. Why is there no?
These are our choices of pictures right here.
Yeah.
Oops, hang on.
That's crazy. It goes from 78 to 95. Like
This is when, all right, so these are pictures taken by the U.S. Geological Survey for soil conservation.
Okay.
Okay, so they mostly were taking pictures of farmland, but they didn't stop. They just kept taking pictures of everything. This is what they use to make all the topo maps. The USGS makes the topo maps. They base them off these pictures. They didn't go out and take the pictures every year. Okay. So, but I'm trying to see if there was like a stairway right there. But, and that's Cops Hill Terrace, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Jesus Christ. Podcast sponsored by Starbucks.
Sponsored by this baby.
I don't particularly see anything. So
Also, George, Maverick wanted you to know he's wearing the New Orleans Fire Department shirt you sent him.
Nice. I bought that from the New Orleans Fire.
He loves that shirt.
What are we looking at? Oh, we're looking at the park. Okay.
that's 1995 Pupilo Park.
It was still there. The cask was still in the ground then.
Yeah. I mean, 2003. I was just trying to see if on one of these things I could spot a 5-step stairway up into the park, but
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I have something I want to talk about, and I really want to get Chris in on
Did
this
Graydon
too.
come in? Oh, yeah, Graydon's in it.
Yeah, Graydon's here. Graydon wanted to talk
Oh,
about
and also
5 steps
Graydon.
still.
Yeah, excellent. So I want to propose something, and I want you guys to tell me what you think. So we were talking earlier about the possibility of reordering verses and things like that. And if you were to read Boston backwards, if you were to read Boston backwards, would you still find the cask there?
Yeah,
You know
because the verse references things that are in right next to each other. It doesn't matter. You wouldn't be
So
in
would it have
Boston.
helped
Though.
more to know? Would it have helped more to know the lit by lamplight, 12th hour, 18th day before you know the Thucydides and Xenophon reference?
Well, we knew it. I mean, people were walking around the Old North Church, ages and ages ago, and we never, ever at the same time people were doing that. They were going, "Oh, it's got to be Fenway Park," because it was
Italian Fenway.
Boston, right? And nobody was differentiating Boston from the North End.
Right.
That never happened.
Okay, so looking at Google Earth, I can only go back to 2007 and Street View, and the park lines up directly with the sidewalk.
Yeah.
I don't know. And Copsville Terrace is, I mean, I guess it's kind of behind you. Like part of it, right? It splits.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was, hang on.
It splits, so it's kind of like behind you to your left and behind you to your right.
Wait. Share screen. There.
So I'm always nervous when I share my screen.
Yeah, like, it's a work computer. There's nothing I got to worry about. All right. So, I mean, are these 5 steps?
I don't know.
I think
Those
the 5 steps is from home plate.
Those are bleachers.
George, about where was the cask? It was
So,
like a little ways up the left line, right?
No, judging from like it's hard to say, right? We've got survey guys, and we know that line was dug, right? So the hole for the line was maybe a couple foot wide, and it was supposedly found right at home plate. Like the only reason that they were digging that deep was to dig out that line. And once you know where the line is, you just dig buckets full along the line, and that's where it was dug up. So it's either right in front of home plate or like maybe just to the right or left of center. It has to be somewhere right there near home plate.
But could you define it as 5 steps from home plate?
No.
Any of us. Like I'm 6'6". I don't know how tall Greg is. I don't think he's very tall.
If you to visualize this, you could think of home plate as a step. Like if you were just taking a casual walk. If you were to take one step behind home plate, your next step would be right in front of home plate, and then you would have to line home plate up 5 times, and there's no way you could get that far away from home plate.
Okay.
So there's another reason why, and just to say this has been awesome. I've been sitting on the edge of my couch yelling at the screen all night. It's been a good conversation. But there's another reason why. There's another reason why if the 5 steps aren't specific steps to get you to the cask at the cask site, then they have to mean something else. So I'm going to throw something at you, George, for the Freedom Trail, since you don't seem to like that. But just quite simply, if you take 5 steps in the area of his direction, and you say the area is the north end, because we know north from the quote, we even potentially have a North Star in the image. There are pretty exclusively just 5 Freedom Trail stops in the north end of Boston.
Okay.
So if you take those, it doesn't matter how they're numbered. And yes, if you start at Faneuil Hall, which is a logical place to start, that would be 5 all the way to the terrace. But if you just say it doesn't matter how you number them, you just take the 5 stops that are actually in the north end of Boston, because all the other 20 or 15 to 20, whatever stops there are outside the north end of Boston.
That's what I was trying to say.
That's such a long walk, though. Like
but it's not that's not an on-site thing. That's like on a map thing. Like take them in the sense of think about these 5 things, not like actually walk them. Because if you don't walk them from the right one, you don't end up at the right spot. But
if you go and pick up a tourist map of the Freedom Trail, or you're working with a map of Boston and trying to solve this, or when he was researching it, and the reference, there's like, and you said there's nothing else referencing the Freedom Trail, but no one has ever decided for sure what in truth be free is. But if you tie Paul Revere to the word free, you have a lot of things that tie together there to get you on the Freedom Trail.
I go back to what.
But conversely,
I go back
if you attach be free to feel at home, you have more baseball reference because you're home free.
But double meaning, right? all of these have so much, and what you're talking about with
Well,
ordering
they
the
have the
verse
potential
earlier,
for double meaning, but does that mean they're actually double meaning, right?
we have so many examples to
Because
not
there's-
think that BP didn't like double meanings.
If that was no, I'm not saying he doesn't like them. I'm saying that in this particular instance, I don't think that's a double meaning. And one example in that particular verse is the fact that he says both steps and stairs in the same verse, right? Because if he wanted you to think about stairs, he would have used stairs both times or steps both times.
Correct.
Just like in Milwaukee.
I go back
So that's
to
why
what-
these steps aren't steps.
I go back to
So
what-
in this case, steps are steps, stairs are stairs.
But just like in Milwaukee, steps are steps. And just like in Cleveland, steps are steps. If you start taking words and being like, this word could mean anything. This very direct word that he used, steps, could mean stops on a map. Like the whole puzzle becomes subjective. Like anything could be anything, but it's not. It's direct. Every single line in this verse is direct, except that one. And we're only assuming it's indirect because we don't know what it is. But once we assume that this line in this verse is completely different from every other line in the verse, it could be whatever we want it to be.
But the steps in Cleveland are not the same types of steps as in Milwaukee.
They're both steps.
Okay. Well,
They're
I'll
not,
throw it out
though.
there. From the beginning, the description of the Freedom Trail was always described as steps along the Freedom Trail, steps to explore the Freedom Trail.
So you're talking about a process, not what.
Every step
I-
tells a story.
I
That's
don't-
how they advertise.
I don't
thing.
understand how the steps in Milwaukee aren't the same as the steps in Cleveland. Because when you
Because
go
not all,
when you go up to
like
Cleveland,
the planter isn't a step. That's why it
There's
says
steps
7
up
But
to
you can
steps.
step
up.
up
there's
onto
steps
it.
up
Yeah,
to it.
but stepping up things is not the same as steps, like the noun. One's a verb, one's a noun.
Well, I think it's 7
Well,
steps up you can hop.
But you're
Just
taking
specifically
steps.
And meaning
You're
stairs.
taking steps.
But specifically saying you're not going upstairs.
No, but in
Because
Milwaukee,
the last
there's
one, you have to get into the planter. So it's not a stairway into the planter,
no, it's not.
but
And-
you can hop it.
But you can take 92 stairs up in 46 steps if you want. You just skip the stairs. So it's not meaning the same thing.
Well, I mean, stairs are made out of steps.
Well, no,
the
and-
individual things are steps.
Maybe this is a Canadian
Oh,
United
Jesus
States
Christ.
thing.
I
Like,
feel like
we
this is-
sometimes will call stairs steps.
I feel
All
like
the
this
time.
I feel like this is
Yeah.
degraded into the dumbest conversation.
Like,
Like steps,
No.
steps are steps. Jesus Christ. They,
Yeah,
like
stairs
they
are
always
stairs.
they always refer to the exact same thing. Trees are trees. Steps are steps, man. Like
No,
A
one's a
step-
verb and one's a verb and one's a noun. They're two different things.
Okay.
And
Fine.
Montreal and Milwaukee and Cleveland.
then it
Okay,
can
so
be
Graydon,
whatever.
tell me
Then
this.
then it can be whatever you want. Then
Graydon,
it can
tell me
literally
this.
be whatever you want.
that's the
Take
case-
5 steps could be travel 5 Dunkin' Donuts. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It could be whatever you want. It could be go to 5 different Walmarts and then end up in the North End. It can be whatever you want.
So
If
tell
it-
me this then. In verse 8, it says step on nature. Is that the same as stairs on nature?
No.
You know what I mean? Like steps are steps, meaning
But
walking steps.
that step
Stairs are stairs.
is a
And he defines
verb.
that in verse 3.
But he says the 92 steps.
Yes, he says
Not the 92 stairs.
he says the. He doesn't say you can take. He says
That's
the.
right.
Ascend the 92 steps, which means
Yeah.
the 92 steps are a thing. In
I-
in Cleveland, he
That's a noun.
says 7
92
steps
steps are a
up.
noun.
7 steps up you can hop. It's a verb, right? You're doing
Yeah.
these steps, right? You're taking physical steps. And
Mm-hmm.
in Boston, he tells you, take 5 steps. Take these 5 physical steps.
But have your back to the stairs.
Have your back to the stairs.
That
So
wouldn't
between
even
how
get
many
you out
verses
into
did
the
we just
street.
define steps and stairs? Right?
If we're talking the Cops Hill steps, that wouldn't even get you out. 5 steps wouldn't. If the Cops Hill stairs
And-
and 5 steps wouldn't even get you across the street.
I feel like I got really aggressive with Graydon, and I'm very sorry I didn't.
No. I love this.
Yeah,
This is like my
listen.
favorite thing ever. You
Okay,
can,
good. As long as
Please,
you realize no
Oh.
disrespect, because I was like, I
No.
feel like this is degraded into a retarded
No,
conversation.
but-
I'm
Oh,
so
that's
sorry, I
right,
didn't
George.
know it would come out like that.
no.
George,
Love
do
it.
you know that this has actually gone full circle back to what we started about? Do clues in one verse map to clues in other verses? When he says ascend the steps in verse 8, does it mean a wingless bird ascended is at the top of stairs in verse 5? Does it mean that every step mentioned in every verse refers to the same kind of steps? Like, though, that was sort of
Well, and I mean, like
where I thought we were starting.
Well, it seems that seems to be true too. Kind of like patterns emerge when you look at these. The way he uses words emerge as a pattern when you look at these as a whole, instead of looking at them, singularly. Like somebody just said giant step in San Francisco. If you were to look at that subjectively, you could think of it as, oh, the Giants, the Giants in San Francisco, take a whatever, right? But if steps means steps in 3 out of whatever of these puzzles, then it probably means that in the others as well.
But it doesn't even mean the same thing in the 2.
But let me ask you this. So let's assume take 5 steps means 5 steps on the Freedom Trail. How is that any different than 5 Dunkin' Donuts? Travel the path of 5 Dunkin' Donuts to end up at the north end. How is it different?
Are there 5 Dunkin' Donuts?
I don't know, but you're assuming
if there are, then I'm on board.
How is that different? Is in that there are 5 steps that take you from.
How many Dunkin' Donuts are there in Boston? Let's look.
It's specifically in the north end.
Now you got to only find them in 1980, though.
Is there a donut reference at the end of the Boston verse? In truth be dunking,
free donuts.
If it said in truth be dunking, then I would agree with
that. He actually put the period and cut that last word out. It was actually in truth be free donuts.
There's a shitload of Dunkin' Donuts in Boston.
Yeah, America runs on Dunkin'.
There's got to be at least 5, right?
There are one. Oh, those are pastry shops. I don't care. What I'm saying is the rest of this verse is very direct, right? Iron sides, metal walls. Everything is direct except this line. And like I said before, we're assuming that it's not direct because we don't know what it is. But there's no reason to think that this line isn't direct as the rest of the verse. There's just no reason for that.
Yeah.
It confuses us and makes us go out of the box because we don't understand it. But just because we don't understand it doesn't mean we need to step out of the box. We need to figure it out.
Well, I think the fact of where it's placed in the verse next to non-concrete directional information implies that it can't just be 5 steps.
How is it?
It makes absolutely no sense. Like if you, for example, you look at New York, you could conceive of that verse in a way to say that you could be somewhere specific where you're taking twice as many steps as the hour. Right? When you're in Cleveland, you can conceive directionally in the verse of how you're taking 7 steps up. You can conceive in the verse of Milwaukee of how you would ascend 92 steps in the order of that verse. But in this, if the Thucydides is north of Xenophon, take 5 steps in the area of this direction, that's not connected to any sort of specific enough information to tell you to take 5 literal steps.
Okay, so let's
it doesn't.
It absolutely is. I disagree 100%.
Let me go back to what I was saying before. Let's split this verse back up the way me and Chris were talking about it. Let's take in the area of his direction. Let's basically assume this is 2 verses, right? One that gets you to the north end of Boston and one that describes the north end of Boston. And it stops at take 5 steps. If Thucydides is north of Xenophon, take 5 steps. I can understand your point, right? So if Thucydides is north of Xenophon, whatever, that verse gets you north end of Boston. Where the hell do I need to go in the north end of Boston? 5 steps. Okay, 5 steps to the Freedom Trail, we can assume, because it's the most popular part, right? That'll get you to the park. If we split up the verse that way, I can agree with you. But if you add the take 5 steps in the area of his direction, you've lost me. Take 5 steps in the area of his direction as the Freedom Trail, you've lost me. But if you split them up and remove in the area of his direction, I could get behind that. Because if a kid were looking at in an encyclopedia, right, and he were looking up the north end of Boston, and he was like, where the hell do I need to start in the north end of Boston? And it says take 5 steps. He were to see the Freedom Trail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Holy shit, I'm somewhere near this baseball field. I got some stairs. I got iron sides. I got yada yada yada.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Could anybody disagree with that?
Sure, but
I mean, that's the point. Disagree with it.
No.
I don't understand what you said because it sounds like you were just supporting what my
Well,
theory was.
I am
I mean-
supporting what your theory is.
Oh,
Chicago,
Depending on whether or not, depending on how you break apart the verse, right?
Chicago had a. Here's where you start. Where M and B are set in stone. You start there, then you walk
Disagree.
away from the cast, turn the corner, come back.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the verse took you like that, but there was a start point. Okay.
I disagree
In
with that. But okay.
Cleveland, there was go to the start with the pillars, start with the columns. It says so right there in the verse. Start with the columns.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Know
what?
Well, but you can't make a path from that if you start
need
at
to
the
make
columns.
a path.
Well, and 100% I disagree with you.
But then if you have a
because-
starting point,
I'm not saying that's the starting point. He said it.
but starting point in terms of where you physically need
I'm
to
just
stand to
saying the
connect
verse has a
clues.
starting point.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
because there's two things you got to find there, Graydon. You got to find out the gardens, and then you got to find out where in the gardens it's located,
Yeah.
right? I don't know if you read the report
Yes.
that I posted where you split the thing up, but yeah, the point where you start looking for the cask as opposed to the garden is where it says, for the search, seek the columns.
But it's a difference between linear thinking and just narrowing down an area.
Well, if we go back to what we were talking about earlier, where we literally figured out a way to get to the Greek cultural gardens using only the first part of the verse, using the litany, that makes sense. If you're a kid in a wheelchair in a library and you look up Greek and Cleveland and you find the cultural gardens, somehow, with the conversation before, you found it. Start your shit at the columns. That makes sense. That it's not. I think the way we're using the word path is different. Matt's talking about the path through the verse, where you're talking about a physical path you have to walk, and the semantics of this might be where we're disagreeing. Not necessarily in the method, but the semantics of the word path.
Well, I just was going to ask the question: what's the starting point of the verse in Boston?
If Thucydides is north of Xenophon.
Is that the starting point?
Face the water.
I would argue the start of the physical the verse that you have to solve when you're there is in the area of his direction. I think
I would have said the starting point was I take in the first lines as a yes, but then the starting point of the verse to me is take 5 steps.
But
Robert
what do you
Bryan
mean?
would really like us to account for the Colosseum restaurants. Can anyone?
The Colosseum is a reference to the immigration and could easily just be talking about the ball field. So
so how is that in the area of his that's redundant as shit. You're already standing here, and it's describing literally things to the front, right, left, and back of you, but you've just taken the left thing and been like, oh, it's the shit you're standing on already.
Yeah, I don't.
No, I'm saying that it's not the restaurant.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's not the restaurant.
I agree with you. It's not the restaurant,
Yeah.
but I can't.
I like the restaurant. I still think that Congress is the Congress Hotel. So
I
like a big
old.
old sign,
Yeah.
like
That shit's been there since the
like
40s.
a word in the
does
verse
somebody
that's on a
not
huge
think
sign
that
in the area.
Congress is
Well,
not the Congress
So
Hotel?
for the
I
longest
thought
time,
most people
Congress
thought it was the road.
was the road, Congress
The
Parkway.
street, yeah.
Because
Um,
I like, to be honest, I completely missed that sign until I was there, and I was like, holy
Could be
shit!
both.
There's a big ass green R
be.
and a big ass red Congress.
Yeah.
Could easily be both. Just like Ironside
Or it
could be
doesn't,
both.
or it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? They both get you to the same place.
So when
It's-
you say starting point, Matt, what exactly do you mean by that?
I mean, I got the book. I know what city I'm in. Where do I go start this treasure hunt?
Physically?
Yes.
It's like, where do I go to and stand to begin? Okay.
So I can look for the next clue because you see the clues in the verse, or at least
Yeah.
you did in Chicago and Cleveland.
I mean, I don't.
I think
argue.
the starting point's sometimes in the painting and sometimes it's in the verse.
And another thing that may be tripping us up is like some of these verses really are a path. Like nobody's going to argue that Roanoke takes you on a journey. Nobody's going to argue that Milwaukee probably does the same thing because it gives you direction. It tells you to go places, but some of them just don't. And Boston, other than take 5 steps, doesn't tell you to go anywhere.
Right.
It doesn't
Same
tell
with
you to
Montreal.
move.
Yeah.
Right. So then the question then is it in the painting?
Or can parts of the verses be paths or linear and other parts not? Like it doesn't mean the whole thing has to be.
I think they can,
Sure.
but I think you need to be given instruction.
Well, and I think you need to find a connection. Like if only part of it is in the verse, it's obvious the other part is going to be in the image, right? Like if there's a somewhat of a directive in the verse, but it doesn't quite tell you a full way to go, then you have to look in the image. Chicago is kind of like that, right? Because the Bowman statue, you get to a certain point, and unless you see the Bowman statue where you're standing, you're obviously going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, well, the Bowman, just about every turn you have to take in Chicago is referenced in either, like specifically in either the verse or the painting or both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like M and B are set in stone. If you're standing at that, which way do you go? You go towards the statue that's just to your left, which is depicted in the image. You get up to
Well, it's 50-50 because to your right is the water tower.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But, water tower is 1.5 miles down the road. You can't see.
But also, let's consider if you can see both of them, then there's a really good chance that you're in the
You
right water
can't see
tower.
the water tower.
Oh, you can't see them both? Oh, okay.
But it is that road. It is that
the same road. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so if you can make that connection.
But the other one, like, it's literally like this chair right behind me, right? Like if you were standing staring at M and B, you would be like, oh, that's that monument. Let's turn this way and go that way. Yeah. And then you get to Congress, R is known, you're standing at a four-way stop. Which way do you go? You go to the Bowman, it's right there.
Because M and B, great, there's the there's the Bowman, right? But there's the fountain of the lakes with the ferry pouring water.
It's the same direction. Yeah, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. Where M and B are set in stone. If you're standing there staring, like I posted a video, I'll send it to you. Where M and B set in stone. If you look over to if you look over your left shoulder, you see the fountain of the Great Lakes. It's in a plaza directly behind you, just to your left. It's really obvious. It's right there. So you turn left and you walk. And then you get to Congress and Roosevelt. You're like, oh, this is this. Which way do I go? I'm at a four-way stop. The Bowman is to your left. So you know to turn left. And then the next thing you're looking for is L sits left. Oh, Lincoln's, like I walk down this road, Lincoln's right here. Over his shoulder is the Fair Folks treasure holder. Let's go that way.
The fountain's not to your right?
No, it's 100% to your left. I got the video. I'll show you the video.
If you're facing
south,
yeah,
it's to your left.
If you're standing on the sidewalk looking at Orchestra Hall, it's to your left. Just behind you to your left. Yeah. So you stand in Orchestra Hall.
I would have said it's on your right shoulder. So okay.
No.
And this is George, just one thing, because you brought this up earlier about adding words into the verse, just because we've said it so many times. And so I'm not trying to be a jerk here at all.
But please be a jerk.
But you've said this. Yeah, you've said this many, many times. So the verse is not L sits left. It's L sits and left beyond his shoulder.
Oh.
So it's really important because part of your path here with that bugged me, because it's not giving you the direction. The left refers to how you find the 10 by 13.
That's a really good point. Thank you.
No, but if you want to talk about double meanings, it is left, as in the cask was left there, and it's also left beyond his shoulder, right? So it's double meaning wise. It's giving you two pieces of information.
Which is why we have to go so careful with these verses, because we don't always know what's directional and not. And think about Boston, the most directional thing was feel at home, which we had no idea was directional until we found it.
So there would be three there. Like if we're going with Chris's, the treasure's left there. But you also, when you're walking down to Lincoln, he is on your left. You physically have to turn left, and you have to go to the left side of the park.
Yeah, you have to go left over his beyond his left shoulder.
Well, it would be his right shoulder, but the left side.
Oh shit! Yeah, left. Yeah, it's left beyond his shoulder, like, so it doesn't tell you which of his shoulders.
Left.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you for that. That's awesome. This is one of the most productive streams.
Well, see, that's actually a really interesting point too, Gray, because like you say, and again, we come back to the whole. So the line before L sits has punctuation. L sits and left beyond his shoulder has none. Okay. So L sits and left, right? So yeah, the treasure was left there, but left beyond his shoulder means, regardless of where his body is positioned or what, like which way it's rotated and stuff, left means from where you're standing looking at him, left is your left, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, you could, like, I mean, theoretically, if you wanted to look at it as his left shoulder, you'd go the wrong direction, right? Because you're looking at the statue, it's facing you. His left shoulder is your right shoulder. So you would end up in a completely different section of the park.
But it doesn't say beyond his left shoulder. It says left beyond his
left
shoulder.
beyond his shoulder. And but that's my point, is the way you read these things is what really makes it definitively a clue or not, or like a really definitive way to read the line, right? Because you could theoretically say L sits and left, R is known, L sits, right, and left, whatever. You could define that how you want. But again, because of the lack of punctuation, we don't really get to see which lines connect to the other lines, right? I think speculatively, if there is punctuation inside the middle of a verse somewhere, it's because Byron couldn't figure out a way to connect two lines, or rather not connect two lines definitively. You know what I mean? Like the ones that are punctuated together are obviously, in my opinion, connected in some way, right? But in this case, I think the first two sentences are one section, and the second two sentences, L sits and left beyond his shoulder, are a totally other thing. R is known, L sits have nothing to do with each other, essentially, right? Like one kind of leads you to the other, but you know, it's all in how you kind of like, we're sitting here reinterpreting the verses, essentially.
I blame me and John for this. Like when we first did the podcast, we just read the shit in a specific way. We didn't pay any attention to it. We always assumed. And I think everybody got in the habit of it, and it's a tough habit to break. Just like with L sits and left over beyond his shoulder, right? You know.
And double meaning is another layer to that.
Yeah.
Because you can't always say you're reading it right or wrong.
No.
You may be reading it right in only one of the ways that it works, because you may be reading it right, but you're missing a secondary layer to how it also works.
Oh God, I don't want to get into the secondary. Like you're the secondary layer to this is very specific, but when you say secondary layer, you open up a world of trouble.
But I just mean double meaning of clues.
Yeah, because like, and to Congress R is known. Like
that's a double meaning.
Would Congress know the president?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's geographically a clue and it's politically a clue.
Well, that's why that was the verse for Washington, D.C. with the Cleveland image. So.
And I think Byron probably thought that these double meanings would be helpful.
No,
and in the
he
result,
thought he was so fucking smart and tricky, and like released the not Webster's dictionary like the next year because he got off on this so much, and he like had to put out this other weirdo book of like all his like crazy I'm so smart ideas.
I'm glad they changed Liberty Boulevard. It makes it harder.
Yeah, right.
But multiple ways of confirming something can also create multiple layers of confusion. Inadvertently too,
which it definitely has done.
Yeah.
Well, and also though, double meanings could act as red herrings, right? Like if one of the words can be read 2, 3, 5 different ways, you know, 4 of those 5 are going to be red herring ways, and the other one's going to be the way, right?
All the time.
Mm-hmm. All the time. So again, this brings up that question from 100 years ago: did Byron have red herrings in here, right?
Or did he, if he was making this as a puzzle, think, well, I better not use the same word the same way every time because that would be too easy. This has got to be trickier.
Or conversely, it'd be too hard. Stairs and steps. If I use the word steps instead of stairs, and I just use steps every time to describe either stairs or actual walking steps, that makes the puzzle way harder than it needs. Or, you know what I mean?
That begs the even like higher level question of, did he expect one person to solve all 12?
No.
Yeah.
Right, because if he didn't, then it doesn't matter.
No,
you figured out how to pair them, and you picked the pair that mattered to you, and you left the rest. It didn't matter what was in them.
Yeah,
whether he used different words or not. If he expected that people would solve all 12,
these are local knowledge puzzles.
I mean, it's confusing enough. It's confusing enough when you just take like
the face value.
Yeah, the face value when it's just take 5 steps. Like how many
freaking
sets of 5 steps would there be in one? You know, it's confusing enough when you just do it at face value. It doesn't need to be. And
The 5 steps on a baseball diamond: first base, second base, shortstop, third base, home plate.
No.
Shortstop.
Canadians.
I don't do sports.
Positions, maybe not steps.
But then you got outfield.
There'd be 9.
But along the box of the infield, there would be
Shortstop.
no, just 4.
Yeah,
Doesn't
just
work.
4. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and the catcher and the pitcher and the 3 bases and the shortstop. But that's just the infield.
I don't know.
Was Byron a tall man?
Yes.
He was fairly tall, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So like his 5
Still
steps
shook
would
that
probably
Cole
be
is
more
6'6".
comparable to mine
Yeah.
than say like, I don't know, Nick's not very tall, I don't think. So, or you know what I mean? Like, I
But
think
you know what? From the New York verse, we see that even though he is aware that different people have different step lengths, and he adapts for it.
Yes.
Maybe.
Like, yeah. But that's one more reason to assume that 5 steps in Boston can't be 5 walking steps, because in Milwaukee, they're defined by the physical stairs. In Cleveland, they're defined by the levels. If you say 5 walking steps, you're off by an inch, you're off by, well, I shouldn't say that.
But
because
stairs
I
are
don't
still
think-
defined as stairs in the Boston verse. That's the part
Yeah,
that I
but-
have the most trouble with.
But if
Steps
I,
always meant something different, he would have just said steps instead of
And
stairs.
stairs are also
I-
defined. Stairs are also defined as sets of steps, no matter how wide they are, no matter how many physical steps you have to take to climb them.
I'm just saying, if these steps are your dig spot, and I told you, like, there was a cask in my yard, George always says that, and I asked 5 different people to take 5 steps and dig, they would dig in 5 different spots. One of them might hit it, 4 of them might miss it. So in all the other step references, they are things that you can't mess up because they're physically defined.
But yours-
And like Matt says, in New York, he accounts for it. Like if you're taking 22 steps in a direction and you've taken them and like 3 feet ahead of you is a logical dig spot, you go, oh, okay, or more. I'm shorter legs.
Or there's something that physically stops you from going any farther. So,
But,
but
wait,
that's
wait, you're falling into the trap that this entire podcast is about, and you're combining or more with take twice as many steps. We don't know that those are meant to be combined. It could just be take twice as many steps as the hour. That could be it. Or more could mean something else. Just because we don't understand what it means doesn't mean we have to
But
assign the reverse before.
logically, though, take twice as many steps as the hour refers to the hour within the picture, correct? Like that's what we've kind of all come to assume.
Maybe not.
I wouldn't say that that's a home run.
But you're playing both sides now, George, because sometimes you like to say
always
just
play
like
both
it is what
sides.
it is. You
Yes.
just literally read it, and then when it's convenient, now it's like, well, it could be something.
no, it's the best way.
I just don't like to lock myself into something that I don't know.
No.
Like I still think or more could have a very logical defined answer. We just don't know what it is, and because we don't know what it is, we shouldn't assume. Right?
The best way to strengthen an argument is to knock it down.
We've talked about this before in previous ones because what's the next line after that? Of the V, right? So when you look at a V,
Or from the middle of one branch,
The
if
middle
you're
of one
taking
branch of the V.
this branch of the V and you're heading that way, you're going to take fewer steps that way than if you're starting on this branch of the V and heading that way, because you have to go here and then 21 steps to get there.
What if you
So
go
that's the
that
or
way?
more. That's the or more.
What
right?
if you go
So it
that
just-
way?
What's
No,
that?
because it doesn't say
There's a
from
V.
the
It doesn't
V.
matter.
It
Go
says
that
one
way.
branch of the V.
Going.
I mean, this
coming
conversation won't have
from-
an answer until we know the answer. Right?
If you're
It just
going
won't.
one way or the other and you're going from one side or the other, it's going to be more steps from the opposite side, right? If you're going this way from this side, it's fewer steps than if you're going this way from this side, because this side is all the way here and then that way.
But he
It
qualifies it.
It depends on the angle of your V.
No,
Your
not at
argument's
all.
right if you have
It
a
doesn't
narrow
at
V.
all. It doesn't
No.
at all, because
But
one
Cole-
side of the V, hold on. One side of the V is further away from this edge of the frame of my screen than this side of the V. Hence the or more. Right?
No, but he
Because
qualifies
from
it.
here
Though.
to the edge is 21 steps or more.
That is a logical interpretation of those lines. I think it's wrong, but it's
No.
logical.
No, it's logically flawed though, because the verse says from one branch of the V.
One side.
So-
means one piece of the V. A V is
Yeah.
two branches.
Yes.
Right? One
So
branch, two
why would
branches.
you say 22 or more steps from one branch if you actually just mean 22 or more steps
No,
from the
you're
V,
skipping-
whichever branch?
No,
you're
you're
doing?
misinterpreting what I'm saying.
But no,
entirely.
you're both doing what I did before. You're skipping a word from the middle of one branch. The middle is very vague. Like in
Well,
your
the middle
in your
is here.
in your
Doesn't
in your
change the
description.
premise.
In your description, the middle is a very vague thing. What's the middle? The exact middle, kind of the middle, whatever. Like you have
It's
to
more
know.
specific.
And you're
No,
you're
because
assuming
the
the
middle
V
is
is a
this V
physical
here.
You're assuming
V
the
and
V is a
not a,
physical thing.
And
a
the middle is
Roman
here.
numeral 5, or there are a lot of things that have 5 branches.
All I'm saying is that Cole's explanation of the or more doesn't work in that instance. That's all I'm suggesting.
But
Because
you're wrong. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Because one
But-
side of the V is further away from
Yes.
over here than this side of the V.
but he doesn't say 22 or more steps from the V, leaving you to not know which branch to
Well,
go
so what
from.
are you saying?
He
then you
says
can go
22
from
or
the
more steps
point of
from
the V,
one.
as
No.
opposed.
And he
like,
doesn't even say 22. He
He
just
says
says
21 steps or
as
more.
many east steps as the hour, and we
And
assume that means the
Either way,
clock.
either way, from the middle of, if we're using Cole's theory that how would you know, right, from here or from here, it's more than 22 steps from this one than it is from this one. Why would he go to the task in the verse of specifying from the middle of one branch of that V?
Okay, let's listen to it this way, okay? Take twice as many steps as the hour from the middle of one branch. That means either branch, does it not?
It
No.
depends on the
It can.
V. No,
It
it
can.
depends on the V because one side of the V might be on a cliff. The other side of the V, might be on a road, which means you can only go into the center of the
No,
V.
it can't be that because Byron said it wouldn't be on a road. It's in the book.
No, he didn't say that. He said it wouldn't be in a dangerous place.
In
An
the median of a
embankment
road
of a-
or something like that.
He said on the
No,
embankment.
no,
of a
no,
road.
no. The V would be between the road and the cliff.
Okay, so
So the
Matt, tell me
center
this.
of the V
Tell me this
is wide
then.
open.
If he says take twice as many east steps as the hour or more, why would he put or more if you weren't starting from a distance that's further away from the original branch?
Because
Let me answer.
Because-
Let me answer. Because I could be a man or a woman. Okay. I can have a short step or a long step. So from wherever I start, I'm going to start walking.
But you've
and the
already said he's
minimum
accounted for
I'm
that.
going to go, whether I'm a man or a woman, is whatever it was, 21 steps. Okay. Okay. That'll get me. But there's going to be something. I still haven't gone far enough. There's going to be something to stop me from going farther.
Right,
Or
but
Keep
he already
walking
says
till it stops.
he already
or
says
to allow you to dig.
east steps and or more. So you're going you're going east. Okay. And I don't know if you guys like my orientation on the camera is going to be different than what you guys see. So this is my left hand. Okay. This is my right hand. According to me, this is east. Okay. I know that's backwards to you guys. So from the middle of one branch of the V accounts for either this one that is taking twice as many east steps as the hour, or this one, which is taking more.
But
You
what
understand what I'm saying? If that line wasn't there, like the or more wasn't there, that almost negates an entire half of the V because you're moving east. The only way, if you're moving east, the only way that this one is going to be or more, or rather, the only way you're going to take more steps is if you're coming from this side of the V. Let's pretend we're standing at the crux point of the Flatiron building. Okay, we have a Flatiron building just a few minutes north of me here. If you're standing at the crux point of the Flatiron building, let's say hypothetically that building faces north and south. Okay, I don't know if it does or not, but I'm just saying hypothetically, if it faces north and south, one of those sides is further west than the other side. And conversely, one of those sides is further east. So in order to come from the west side of the building to the east side of the building and then take twice as many steps as the hour east, you have to assume that you're coming from the other side of the V, right? You're not standing on the east side of the V, hence the or more. The or more means if you're coming from the other side, you're got to get to that spot first and then head twice as many east steps as the hour.
but
You
what
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but what if you're not sure which way to go?
What if
It tells
it's
you directly. It says
what if
each
it's the
step.
Coast Guard?
No. But
One
what
bridge.
if 22 steps, 22, and I love how everyone says 21 because I know we're assuming a lot of things here, but it's 11 o'clock, so twice as many. It's 22.
That's 22. Yeah, sorry.
And it's funny that everyone says 21, and it's because there's a 21 in the New Orleans verse, which just tells you how mushed up all this stuff is in their head. But if you had small steps and you took 22 east steps from the V and looked down and you were on pavement, you would go, what the hell? It can't be buried here. It's pavement. But if you looked 6 feet ahead of you and there was a planter, you would go, oh, my steps aren't as long as Byron's. He said
Okay, but
22 or more to let you know that you need to extend further to get to your dig spot.
Right, but that line doesn't in any way say that by doing these steps, you're getting to the
Yeah,
top.
Let me
we
break
need
in.
to-
Let me break
Hold
in.
on, no.
No.
Go ahead.
Let me break in. What if it's not subjective? What if, like all of the other verses, it's not subjective, and we're just talking about it like it's subjective because we don't understand it?
Well, but that's hence the or more.
There is not a subjective verse in the solve. There's not a subjective line in the solve puzzles. They're objective, and we're talking about this as if it's subjective. If it's 20, if it's like Cole, if it's like you're saying, if it's 21 steps or more, it could be fucking anywhere. It could be 100 steps past 21 steps. It could be anywhere.
Unless there's something to stop you.
No, nothing's telling you, like, just like in Cleveland, you could hop over that shit.
No.
Like,
You're walking toward the cliff.
It could be anywhere.
You can't go any
It
further.
doesn't matter. It could be anywhere. You could take 21 steps. If you're taking more than 21 steps, it could be 100, it could be 200, it could be 700. It doesn't matter. What if it's not subjective and we just don't understand it, so we're assuming it's subjective? There's no evidence that says this has to be subjective. We just don't understand what it is, so we're assuming it's subjective. Does that make sense? Like, nothing else is subjective.
Nah.
Point me to a
really
subjective
be
line
disputed.
in these verses. One.
No.
Point me to one. There's nothing in them that's subjective.
Except the quotes.
Well, except the quotes.
Quotes are not subjective. The quotes are objective.
Well, the where they
Well,
lead you is subjective. Well, no, I guess
yeah.
not. How you interpret them is a little bit subjective. But I can't think of a solved line that's subjective that we fully understand. Like, you got to take shit like In Truth Be Free out because we don't fully understand it.
Or Rhapsodic Man Loyal.
So we assume it's subjective where everything else isn't. Everything else is very objective. Does that make sense? I think that's the point I'm getting at. It's like,
So
once you make the puzzle subjective, it could be whatever you want it to be.
your argument is that he wouldn't give an instruction that wouldn't work the same way for everyone. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Like he wouldn't rely on your amount of steps to take to define where you arrive at because people are different.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. In the very basic sense, yeah.
So in that sense, back to Boston, then the 5 steps would have to be like stairs
It would have to.
or yeah.
No, because he already says stairs. You take steps on
But
stairs.
he's using that as an example. It would have to be
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
It would have to be something physical. Something
Because it can't
that you
just be walking 5 steps on flat ground because that would be subjective.
I would think that's true. From my argument right now.
Well, yeah. Well, we stand where Boston was found, and you look around, and we have a pretty good idea what the place looked like in 1980. There's no 5 steps to help you get there.
People in the comments are Rob is saying, but I've seen this so many freaking times that home plate in Boston was not where it is now. When you design a ball field, you design the outer portion of the ball field, and everything is mathematically based on that ball field. Home plate is always where home plate is, unless you completely redesign.
And we have aerial photographs that show it does match exactly.
It doesn't move. It's right there.
Yeah.
Like in order to move home plate a couple of inches, you have to completely redesign the park.
So if the 5 steps is not tied to the actual dig site, and we're saying it can't be something subjective, then how, like, doesn't that just open the door for something like 5 steps like the Freedom Trail? Because how could it be
Or the 5 years.
5 literal stairs, that point in the verse? Like if you're talking about take 5 stairs,
But he doesn't say that. He says take 5 steps.
I
Yeah,
think, I
but
think
if we're
what-
defining
If you're
steps
back to the
as that,
stairs,
I think
I know that.
I think what my argument is it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't like.
It can't be a step like a stair.
But
It's impossible.
But it doesn't mean
You're
it's-
right.
But it can't. But that doesn't mean that it's a subjective line. That doesn't-
No, but well,
And it doesn't
That's-
mean that you need to take the steps at that point in the verse. He's telling you have to take 5 steps. He's not telling you when you have to take 5 steps.
but if it's
Point two.
that's a very specific instruction that couldn't matter unless you were at the dig spot. It's like go up these 5 steps a mile and a half away and then find this next clue and then find this next clue. It can't work that way.
The way I look at the Boston puzzle, it's a cop out statement every time somebody says it, and it's a cop out statement when I say it. I think we don't know because we're not there. We're not there in 1982. The shit's changed, so we don't know, and there isn't enough like physical media for us to tell exactly what this place was like. Because I mean, it could be a vague, tiny little thing. It could be a May 1913 where it's something tiny that you wouldn't know unless you were right there. But when you were right there, it makes total sense. But since it's not 1982, it's not there. We don't know. We don't.
So
know
Nick
what it
and
was-
Carolyn were just in Boston a little while ago, and Nick told me that when they stood at the new home plate, which is obviously a different spot than the old.
No,
home
it's the
plate.
same spot.
Okay, well, regardless, he was standing at home plate, and he said that realistically, about 60% of the verse and image stuff, you can see it from that home plate, regardless of where it used to be compared to where it is now, right? So one could assume, again, logically, that if you're standing at that home plate right now, you can see the Ironsides flags, you can see the green Tower of Lights, you can see all this stuff if your back is to the stairs and all that kind of thing, right? So, it seems like it's very subjective to the point where as long as you're standing there, things are subjective, but everything, if you're not, things seem very objective, right? And like words like feel at home, right? We wouldn't have thought that if we didn't know about the home base, right? Feel at home could have meant anything. Feel at home could mean you've been away at war and something that you're experiencing is nostalgic, right? Like feel at home can just mean nostalgia
which is
in
what
a
we
sense.
thought for a long
But
time.
yeah, but it's literally feel at home. That's a subjective thing. Home is home base.
It's objective. You're using those words.
Or sorry, yes, you're right. Sorry, objective. I think we should be searching for objectivity because it helps encompass everything, right? As opposed to being specific to this puzzle. Because obviously over the last hour, one of the biggest arguments we've had was steps versus stairs, right? Would he use the word stairs if he meant steps and vice versa, right? So we're trying to come to an objective conclusion here. And now that we've seen Boston solved, all the letters, feel at home, 12th hour, 18th day, like all these things mean something objectively to us, right?
Phil's hopping in the comments. Phil says, Graydon, how about this for a step? A measure or action, especially one of a series taken in order to deal with or achieve a particular thing.
Yeah, like steps in a direction. Absolutely, it could be that.
Are there 5 steps to this puzzle?
And then what would the directions be, right? I mean, it's something we've searched for fucking ever.
North. All right, I got
not that kind of direction.
Yeah,
Like an
I know.
instruction
Yeah.
manual.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
instructions, yeah.
I got to go, guys. But I got.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, we
Yeah.
should probably end soon. We've been gone like an hour, almost 3 hours.
I know. Yeah, 2:40. Yeah,
Yeah.
I gotta go out.
So
too.
we're gonna end now. Subject for the upcoming next week is cicada. We're gonna talk about cicada,
Let's do it.
Anytime, I'm down.
and then we
Cicada
should
and rabbits.
we should
And
all get
rabbits.
back together and talk about subjective versus objectivity because I love this conversation. Also, tomorrow's Byron Price's birthday, so everybody.
Oh yeah,
Happy birthday, Byron. Hey, let's have a
Yeah.
cheer for
birthday,
Byron.
BP.
Oh, wait, hang on. Where's my cake?
It's long gone.
Where did my cake go? Hang on.
Have a cake.
I
Oh,
have a cake.
Oh yeah, George had a thing.
Happy birthday, Byron.
hey!
It's Byron.
Happy birthday, Byron.
All right.
All right,
George
guys.
is just drinking a Monster at 20 to 11.
I am.
Yeah.
Good luck going to bed.
Yes. And I took my Adderall.
Hey, there
Think
you go.
about subjectivity versus objectivity for the next 6 hours.
Everybody have a good night.
I'll be up a while. If any of you guys want to talk some
All right,
more, let me
friends.
know.
Yeah,
I'm good, Cole. I'll keep going.
we are no
For
longer
sure.
streaming. Dude, this was great. Thank you so much,
So good.
everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's also, obviously welcome back. We can talk about this shit anytime. Thank you, Graydon. I'm sorry
Yeah,
if I
it's my
insulted
favorite
you.
thing.
No, I friggin' love this. Like, this is like my favorite thing ever. Like, go at it.
It's really hard to find people